We're going to call this to order, so Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderman Muhammad, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Chairman Vaquero.
Present. And Alderwoman Howard is in a meeting across the hall. I'm just saying that the Alderwoman Howard will be over. She's in a meeting across the hall. So what I want to do is, Alderwoman Navarro. Oh, you're up. It's because the Heather's Alderwoman Navarro is representing the bill, or and so if you can kind of, and then you also sit on HUDs.
I do not.
Okay, so I asked Alderman Oldenburg. He thought maybe you did, but
I mean, I can give you a summary of
just
that bill. I'm a
so
co-sponsor of that one as well.
So that we all know. This meeting is taped. Everyone is going to get a chance to come up and talk. I really think that after this, I think the most important thing is that we put together something that we know makes sense to neighbors. I've had neighbors call me that feel like, even though nothing stops the vacation from coming into a neighborhood, neighbors that have called me say, gee, you know what, you're legitimizing them by charging a fee. So, that just to give you my thought, but I'm sorry, Alderwoman Navarro, and I see Alderman Oldenburg came in. She does not sit on HUDs, but she can give me a summary. Sorry? I might have you explain what's going on in HUDs. Okay, I'm sorry. Alderwoman Navarro, it's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will give just kind of a brief overview of Board Bill 222. I know that the sponsor presented on this bill to the committee a couple of weeks ago, right. And our primary purpose today is to make sure that we hear from the public about this, but I do want to just give you a brief overview. So Board Bill 222, what we are attempting to do with this bill, and then there is another bill in the HUD's committee, which is Board Bill 223, which also would regulate short-term rentals. And what we are attempting to do here is balance the needs of homeowners who are looking for an opportunity to earn additional revenue by taking advantage of the short-term rental option, along with all of the other needs of our city, from making sure we have enough affordable housing, that we have long-term rental options available, and then also making sure that we're able to maintain a sense of community and quality of life in our neighborhoods. We know that when a home is operated as a short-term rental, that there are things that come along with that are not typical of a regular single-family home, for example, whether it's parking and trash, and I expect that we'll hear more about that later. So what this bill does is set up a framework where we can regulate this industry, essentially, because right now we don't have any rules on the books that govern short-term rentals. So this would set up a framework for permits and inspections, and then and also as well as a board that would come up with policies. And if any owner is not complying, then we would be able to pull that permit. There would be a whole process in which we could enforce compliance with this. The bill is not terribly long, so I encourage everybody to look it over. It does set up a board that would create policies that would be a little bit more nimble than if we were to have to amend this bill every time a new situation arose. The board bill that is in HUDs is a zoning bill, and what that one essentially, just for your information, the way it is currently drafted, what it would do is create a conditional use for any investor-owned units in zones A through E. And that's part of what we have heard, is that there's a distinction between somebody who lives in their home and is renting out a bedroom because maybe they've had kids go off to college, or they have maybe a two-family and they want to rent one side but they live in the other one. That's very different than somebody who lives out of state and purchases 15 or 20 units or homes, never sets foot in them, and is turning people over week to week. So we see that there's a big distinction between those. And so right now the way the bill is drafted is that if you're investor-owned, you do not live on the premises, then you would have to get a conditional use permit, and that would give an opportunity to everyone nearby to weigh in, and there would be certain conditions that could be put on there, and then that permit could also be yanked if the neighbors have complaints.
That's the one in HUDs. Right?
Yes, and that's the bill in HUD. So this one just has to do with the building commission and setting up the inspections and the permits, and then a board to come up with policies moving forward.
Okay, and I do want to apologize to both, Navarro, Alderwoman Navarro and Ingrassia, this has been, for what it's worth, we put this on 2 meetings prior to this that I thought, well, this is going to be a really quick meeting, and instead they ended up being like 2 or 3 hour meetings, and so the sponsor said, well, let's move it to the next meeting, which ended up being forever. Then we decided we're going to do it this Thursday at 10 o'clock, but then somehow they got it mixed up over there, even though the tape said Thursday at 10. So then it became Tuesday, which a lot of people didn't know. And then Alderman Navarro called me and said, Joe, this isn't fair or right. This needs to be heard. I said, well, we're going to have an issue getting a quorum this whole week. I knew that was going to be a problem. But I will say that it was not either one, the sponsor or co-sponsor. In fact, I told them they could add my name. The reason this is where it's at. It's meetings that I set up that I thought were going to be really short that turned out to go on forever. And their willingness to keep moving their bill to another meeting, and then this got all screwed up. But I do think it's important we hear it. This doesn't mean this bill is a dead bill. It just means it's really, if it goes to the next session, that's in April. That means it would be first read and assigned to committee. I would love to see these bills paired, put both heard in the same committee or maybe even in legislation, which is almost typical of a bill that when somebody's a sponsor, they usually put that bill, if they can, and legislation is certainly open to that. And my offer to keep my name on it is there. But I did want to apologize, and we're all here today because Heather called and said, Joe, I had all these people coming, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And so it is not the sponsor's fault that this has been a mess. I will take the blame for the mess. And I appreciate that they've been willing to keep moving it around. So if you want, what we can do, we can either do a sign-up. Well, why don't we do a sign-up sheet and then just come up in whatever order, or Heather, you could just bring people up one by one and let them sign up as they come up.
I think, yeah, if people just want to come up and sign up.
Okay, so that's what we'll do. We'll just come in and sign up, and it's for the minutes. And you can go on YouTube, and this whole meeting will be taped, and I encourage.
Yes, so if you'd like to speak,
Yeah.
Get your name on here, and then.
And they'll just call it in the order that you signed up.
Thank you. Do you mind if I sit up
No,
here?
please. You can, I would like to have you on the committee. We only got, the problem with the committee is we lost people.
Oh, you're not up here by yourself.
Yeah, I feel kind of dumb, but Carol's supposed to be coming over. And so, I mean, you have the possibilities, but it might be, I'm just telling you from people that talk to me. They kind of feel like if we pass this, we're legitimizing it. But anyway, and again, that's why I apologize. I know it's not her fault or your fault, but this was not my fault either. This was Trump's signature. Yeah, and then Terry, they're like, well, meetings change.
It's hard as it gets close to the end of session and everything gets.
And I should have did this earlier, but I didn't realize those meetings were going to go like they went to do that. You know, they just went. And then it says over there, but we're going to vote on the new secretary, so we said they would hold on to them. People over there too. I'm gonna let you read them off.
Okay.
I wouldn't even be able to read, like, the one that says private citizen, but I don't. I'm gonna let you read them if you can. We'll start at the top and work our way down. The one I can't tell at all. I know the guy in the yellow shirt was first. Okay, I think we got everyone signed up. And I am going to have the clerk read the names in the order they came in. And everyone that wanted to speak is signed up. Okay. Are you,
Tim?
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
come on, if you can give us your name and,
Tim McNabb. I'm a resident in Holly Hills, and my wife and I manage an Airbnb in our home, and we have a standalone property. So to address a couple of questions, I sent a letter to Alderwoman Murphy, and I'd be happy to forward that as well, which is kind of a recap of what I'm going to be sharing with you this morning. First off, there's a lot of cons that I've heard from alderpersons and people who are representing neighborhoods. There's some pros as well, but just to show that I'm embracing the cons, some of the problems we see are bad behavior by guests. Totally understand that. People acting like, well, you know, they rent the place and they throw a beer bash, all right? I understand that part. Short-term owners don't meet the same regulatory standards as, say, a Drury Inn or like the Fleur-de-Lis Inn, which is a big bed and breakfast that we're familiar with. And also making sure that, you know, we need to pay, as business owners, we need to pay our taxes, like payroll taxes and the hospitality taxes that are legitimate and due. They're placed on anybody who's inviting guests to stay with them, and it is only fitting and just that other businesses who are in the same hospitality industry should cover those. So those are the three major cons that I can kind of see regulation having an impact on. But I'd also like to address a couple of the pros, several of the pros to having Airbnb in the city. Well, first off, we're ambassadors for our city. My wife and I, we've lived here for over 20 years. We love the city of St. Louis. And when people come stay with us, we sit down, we have coffee in our kitchen. They ask us, hey, where you want to go? And I say, hey, check out the salted, check out this restaurant or that restaurant, or go to the City Museum. Our zoo is the best in the world for free. You know, you got to check that out. So we're enthusiastic promoters of people who are coming to our city. I get revenue to take care of my house. I live in a Holly Hills home, and the extra revenue is almost entirely my upkeep budget. So we remodel our bathroom, a bathroom that cost $6,000 to remodel, we were able to cover based on fees that were coming from our Airbnb. So that's an important part of maintaining the housing stock in the city of St. Louis. We have a city that has infrastructure for 1 million people, and we've got a lot less than 1 million residents. There's a lot of housing stock that investments like this, properly managed in good faith, could really improve things for our city and maybe allow some of those improvements to bring more residents in. Short-term rental attracts visitors that would likely not be here. We had some guests coming in. It was a young family, 3 kids, mom, dad. They couldn't afford $140 a night at a Residence Inn or a Holiday Inn, whatever have you not, but they could afford our B&B. They still spent money. They went out to restaurants and they went to get pizzas and they went to the attractions in St. Louis. So I know at least in that situation, somebody who may have done a staycation in Springfield, Illinois, came to St. Louis, went to the ball games because they had to have a place that was affordable that worked within their budget. We have reserved guest capacity. I don't think there's quite enough guest capacity if everybody who could fit into our convention center came to St. Louis at one time, I don't know if we have a place to stay for them. So we are limited by beds. A robust Airbnb that is appropriately regulated with consideration of our neighborhoods, I think would give us some reserve capacity. We could attract more people into our city. And then finally, we are really heavily regulated already. Before a regulator could get their shoes on to come shut down an Airbnb, Airbnb will have it shut down because of bad ratings. So if my house is dirty or poorly maintained or doesn't look safe, we just have to have somebody give us a couple of 1-star reviews. We won't get any more bookings at all. And by the time a regulator shows up to cite a facility, a more commercial property, you know, we're already shut down. An Airbnb is a different type of facility than, say, a hotel, where there might be 150, 200 guests. If there's a fire in my home, no one's going to get trampled by 50 people trying to exit the same floor. We're all just going to leave the house like you would normally leave a house. We've got the best fire department in the United States, so an Airbnb is not going to provide an opportunity for a mass casualty. When it comes to health, we're not going to have an outbreak of Legionnaires in our house or in our standalone property. You know, we're not going to have 300 people exposed to the same pathogen at our place as you would. So the regulations do need to be a little bit different, and they need to be, I don't think they need to be quite as robust because of some of those issues. So we talked about health and safety, traffic and parking, whether it's one family staying every week or one family staying for a 2-year lease, at least in our properties, the parking is the same. Now, I don't let people rent our property for a beer bus, so we actually will look at who's wanting to book our property, and if it's a 22-year-old, you know, we kind of look at that askance and we ask among ourselves, hey, have you ever had this guy? And sometimes we found out that this is not the kind of person we want to rent to for the health and safety of our neighborhood. I'm open to a shall issue permit regime where the city will give a short-term rental, say 120 days in a calendar year. If they're going to rent more than that, then they do need to get some kind of a permit. I would like for the permit to be shall issue rather than may issue. And then finally, that would allow people who are kind of getting into the industry to try it before they buy it without having to go through a whole lot of effort, only to find out they're not very good at it. Collecting taxes. When we visited Belize a couple years ago, the Belizean government collects taxes by a ledger. You fill out who is a guest and what their cost was, and then you calculate, the property managers would calculate what your taxes are. I'd be happy to send it. I'd love to send a check to the city of St. Louis because that means I'm making money. So as long as it's a fair tax and it's not onerous to comply with the tax, I'm fine with paying fair hospitality and property taxes. Well, I'm already paying property taxes, but I'm fine with paying hospitality taxes. It seems only fair to do that. So I don't think anybody who runs a business is going to object to something of that nature, meaning that it's not an onerous regime for reporting. As far as guests behaving badly, I'd like to address that. It's already illegal to disturb the peace in a neighborhood. I would, well, we've had problem neighbors in my Holly Hills neighborhood. We have a nice neighborhood, and we've had people driving up, selling drugs, acting the fool, and the police take care of it. We contact our neighborhood stabilization officer, and it's a lengthy process to get it taken care of, but it can be taken care of. I'm open to a accelerated regime where you get a complaint from the neighbor, and the police go by, and it's like, wow, these guys are really being jackasses. So if you walk in, so if the police officer walks in and says, hey, if we got to come back out here again, we're going to lay a pack up and get out notice on you. And that means if you're disturbing the peace and at the police officer's discretion, you tell the guests that are there, get your stuff, beat it. I don't care where you go, you just can't stay here. Then I think that would quickly mitigate some of those problems that you might have otherwise, that you can't just kick somebody out who's on a lease, but if they're a short-term rental, they're just being a bad guest, and issue the property owner a citation, that sort of thing. There's a 31-day limit that I'd like to address. Right now, we have 2 visiting nurses who've been here for longer than 31 days, and they're an important resource to Barnes and Mercy Hospital, and they're delightful guests. They're great, they're not any problem whatsoever, and they're bringing a vital service to the city of St. Louis and the region. The 31-day limit will actually will not solve the guests behaving badly problem, which I think is a legitimate concern, but rather it'll also eliminate people who are unlikely to cause trouble, because if you're a long-term guest, you're not here to have a long 31-day party. You're here to work for a while, that sort of a thing. So I'd like to see that stricken, absolutely, from the bill. And the occupancy issues are already mitigated by the fact that all of our places have occupancy limits. And finally, this is my last point. If you're going to have a task force, would you please invite short-term rentals? I think that people who have a problem with short-term rental, they should be represented, but also people who are running them should be represented as well. That could be by appointment. I'm working to get a short-term rental group together that will act like a community association for the STRs. So at least there's a body that is being involved with that so we can work things out. Thank you for your time, and I'm open to questions.
Yes, Alderwoman Navarro does.
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you. Mr. McMahon? Is that-
McNabb.
McNabb, okay, great, thank you. One question I have about, so it sounds like you use primarily Airbnb for the platform?
VRBO tossed us off their platform. One, they didn't do home base. VRBO only wanted to do standalone properties, ironically. But the home base, they just quit booking for us. And so we're just using Airbnb as a booking agent. There are other potential booking agents out there that we might get contacts from, but from a practical standpoint, it's just Airbnb.
Gotcha. Well, and I just also want to say thank you for sharing your story and for being, responsible host. In terms of the comments, you were talking about how Airbnb and these platforms kind of help with the regulation because these comments are so influential. Do you ever receive comments from people, from like neighbors? Because it seems like most of the comments come from the guests. But if neighbors have issues, is there any way that feedback filters in through the platform?
Well, as a practical matter, all right, so let's say my neighbor has an Airbnb and I see somebody behaving badly. I go over to him and say, hey, George, what's going on? This guy is out here, he bumped into my car with his car. Can't this guy park? Is this your cousin? Well, that's actually my Airbnb guest. It's like, oh, really? Well, why don't you talk to him about not parking like a knucklehead, okay? That kind of communication, rather than running off to a government or the police, that's how I handle things. And I think that's actually the most effective way to do it. So we had a problem property in our neighborhood. It wasn't Airbnb. It was just clowns living there. Well, Kevin, your lessor is an idiot. They're doing all these kind of things. Oh, I'm really sorry, Tim. I'll take care of it. He took care of it. But there are other people, like we have a standalone property. The commercial property owner, it's like impossible to get them to cut their weeds down and pick up the trash. I'm over there picking up their trash all the time. And so even though a neighbor can't go to Airbnb and complain about a property, because you don't know where the property is until you actually book it, right. I'm open to having a kind of like a complaint line that is managed by like that community association for Airbnb. So let's say I'm one of 5 people on the board. We get a complaint through Facebook about a property. I got no problem calling that guy out. Hey, you trying to ruin it for all of us? That's a nice property there. It's shame something should happen to it. That sort of thing. But that's kind of what's happening here. I think most owners, I want to only speak for myself, but most owners would be open to having a means of that sort of, we've got the customer feedback, now we need the neighborhood feedback. And that's fine with me, but the kind of regulations that you're proposing, I don't think actually seem to create that.
Okay,
Did I answer your question?
Yes, yeah, no, that was great. And I just wanted to address the 31-day limit in there is because of the way that our ordinances and our state statutes work. So right now, if you rent over 31 days, you're a regular rental. Like, that's already dealt with. So there's not a limit on renting more than 31 days. You're just not considered a short-term rental at that point. So if somebody's staying there more than 31 days, this bill wouldn't even apply.
Okay.
It's only applying to rentals that happen in time periods less than 31 days.
Okay, well so just to paraphrase what you're saying. So you're saying that if my nurses who are staying with us, right?
They have a month-to-month lease, essentially,
They're
right?
basically on a month-to-month lease.
Yeah.
And so they would not fall under this regulation at all, even though so does that mean I don't have to pay the taxes on them?
I'm not going to answer any questions about taxes right now. I'm just saying that it wouldn't be considered, anything over 31 days is not defined as a short-term rental.
I understand you've got a short-term rental. Oh, no, Nurse Ashley there, she's been here for over a month. Oh, okay, never mind.
Right, yeah, that's not,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Because you already have the right to rent out your property for, a month or 6 months or 2 years.
So you're really just addressing, the 31-day limit is, this is how we're defining a short-term rental.
Right.
Not saying you can't rent longer than that.
Right. The issue is we don't have regulations on the books if you're renting your property for a week or 2 weeks or to a different person every other weekend. Right. So that's what this is about. So I just wanted to let you know.
All right. Well, not to monopolize the time here, but it sounds like I'm asking and answering good questions. Do we have statistics on how many short-term rentals there are and what percentage of those are problem properties? Because I know there are problem properties in long-term rental, because I've got some.
Yeah, the
right?
short answer for short-term rentals is that no, we do not have good numbers, and that's because we don't have a system right now where people have to register and get a permit and all of those things. So we can estimate based on what we see available online, but we don't get data from any of those platforms to tell us how many are listed at any given time. So we have to estimate. But the idea is with this, we'll have a better handle of, okay, how many do we have? Where are they? And having a 24-hour contact, for example, you know, that we know who to reach out to if there's a problem. So we need to get a handle on that data.
All right, well, I'm a pretty advanced IT specialist, so if you have, I'll give you my contact information.
Okay,
I'd be
great.
willing to help you in any way I can. You know, I really do love the city. My wife does as well, so do my neighbors. We want to do what we can to both make it a welcoming place, but also to tell people who are business owners, hey, you know, you're welcome here. And, you know, we're not going to be overly onerous. I think that was our first impression, was like, oh my gosh, you know, really, they got nothing else to do? But having addressed it a little more thoroughly, I can see that this is something that's worth looking into and coming up with. Anything else? All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you so
I yield the
much.
floor.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. If you can just state your name, pull the microphone down so they can hear you on the
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. Really?
A little bit. yeah,
There we
but
go.
till you
Okay. My name is Rachel Presley, and do you want my phone number too?
No, just.
Okay.
just-
You don't
wanna blast that
You don't,
on
we don't, you don't want,
Oh, am I being televised? Okay.
oh, yes, you are.
All right. So I have.
Could you tell us maybe what neighborhood or ward that you're in? That would be great.
So my name is Rachel Presley. My sister and I own SF Shannon Real Estate. We have property we have vacation rentals. We're in Shaw, Tower Grove East, Central West End, and Midtown. We have 21 vacation rentals within multifamily apartment buildings. We are owner-operators. I spend a lot of time in my apartment buildings. So though I fall under the investor category, I am very actively involved in the running of my business and our vacation rentals. So I am thankful to you and to Alderwoman Ingrassia for initiating this legislation, because I think it's important. I think to say that vacation rentals should not exist at all is foolish, and it's lacking foresight, I think. What do I wish to say? The bill that I see before me is good. The concern that I have is over the two-tier pricing. I don't think that that is fair. Obviously, we will pay whatever we need to, but I don't think it's necessary to separate it. I will say that for us, our vacation rentals has raised our game and made our buildings nicer places to live. And from my experience, we're in touch with our neighbors. The tenants who live in our building are aware of what we're doing, and our neighbors physically on either side of us know what we are doing, and they have a direct way to reach us. And I encourage them to reach out whenever there are issues. It's my experience that most of our guests, I would say 95% of our guests, really just want to come to St. Louis to do whatever they're doing, and they're usually in very good spirits and very pleasant. They're not having crazy parties with tons of people. We follow all compliance issues. We pay the taxes on all of the apartments, the lodging tax, hospitality tax, what is mandated. We have housing conservation certificates on our properties. We pay our property taxes, obviously, maintain our properties. So we're trying to be as responsible as possible and good stewards. I live in Compton Heights, and I know that there are a couple of buildings and homes in our neighborhood, primarily residential neighborhood, that have Airbnb. And my hope is that that would cover under the neighborhood association guidelines. There's not enough teeth for people who have bad problem properties next door to them. And I know that there are a lot of people who are angry about having a vacation rental next door to them or in their block. I don't know what the right response is to it, except to have healthy legislation that doesn't impede business. And then, you know, I also know there are so many different levels and players involved, including lodging, hotels, traditional bed and breakfasts, et cetera, that have an interest as well. So I think a task force is a good thing, and I know I would certainly be willing to help with that. What I will say is, and what I encourage the city is to just offer a healthy balance and seek that out where they can. Because I know that it's there, and I know that so many people I talk to, while they don't want it next door to them, when they go online tonight, because one day they will travel, I know we will, they're going to go to Airbnb or HomeAway or whatever platform because they want to be in a cool neighborhood. And St. Louis has such beautiful neighborhoods, so it's a nice way to experience our city. And we are ambassadors, and I know that I am. I will say without a doubt that we have increased the property values in every one of the locations where we are. I almost would like to have a vacation rental in every single building that we maintain, because we do a better job at maintaining that building and being better stewards for the properties while we have them. So that's what I have for you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Any
sir.
questions? Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. No, that's it.
You're fine.
Yeah.
Daniel.
And I'll make sure they do go to the committee members. They're around, they're just not here.
Yeah, they're just, just three.
Okay.
Okay. My name is Daniel Sesh. I'm a 50-plus year resident of Skinkert of Oliver neighborhood. And I was a landlord owning and managing rental properties for 45 years. So, yeah, I love the city. In the bill, there's no mention that the short-term rental operators will be paying hotel taxes or hospitality taxes or whatever they are. I think that needs to be made explicit some way, because I understand there's some people who say, oops, they will automatically, and other people say, no, we need to put it to a vote of, put it to the voters that it's going to be extended. So that needs to be nailed down before any of these bills pass. The last thing we need is to regulate the short-term B&Bs, then have some humongous investor-owned company come in and challenge and say, oh, no, we don't have to pay it, and have their lawyers come in and tie everything up for 2 or 3 years. So, figure out with the city councilor what needs to be done. I do not understand the distinction in the bill between, quote, owner-occupied and, quote, premises owner-occupied. For me as a layman, that just seems to be a distinction without a difference. Hearing from the first two speakers, especially the first speaker, I think it is very important that the bill be split into 2 sections. One is for owner-occupied. I agree that it is good that people who have a spare bedroom, or maybe they're in a 2-family, and especially seniors who end up with fixed income, their assets are tied up in the home, be able to raise money, whether it's income to live on, additional income, or whether it helps maintain the property. I have no issues with owner-occupied short-term rentals. And I think most of my neighbors I've talked to don't. I think the other one is the investor-owned short-term rentals. And hearing from Rachel, we sort of get down to this conundrum of the absentee, sometimes out of town, LLCs, corporate owners hide behind the skirts, and I'm not being sexist here, of the investors who are within a mile or a few blocks of the properties, who clearly and are available to their neighbors if there's issues. And somehow in there we have to say there's going to be very good investor-owned and there's going to be pretty crummy investor-owned. And I believe that there needs to be different rules for each type. I'm not going to go into specifics there. And those rules should be more stringent for investor-owned. One of the things in the bill is that it says when this goes into effect, people would be required to get permits after 180 days or 6 months. That doesn't make sense. It would seem 90 days or 3 months should be sufficient. We know who the property owner is, and 3 months is a long enough time for people to go and register, and there's no reason they should need 6 months to take care of that. And this may be taken care of in the zoning bill, but there need to be limits on how many investor short-term rentals are on each residential block. You can end up with multiple short-term rental units on a block, and that threatens neighborhood stability because you're increasing the ratio of transients in the housing stock to the long-term residents, whether they be long-term renters or owners. The question in my mind is, how do you hold investor-owned short-term rentals accountable, especially when the investors are out of town, or they're LLCs, or they're corporations? Do we really want companies like TEH Realty, which is out in the county, driving the county government crazy, to take over swaths of housing in St. Louis? And one of the handouts I gave you is called the Great Wall Street Housing Grab. And yeah, she has the copy.
She's been copies.
Yeah, exactly. And that talks about how in 2008, when many people lost their homes to foreclosure, these hedge funds basically generated huge amounts bought up these homes, and in high demand areas in Los Angeles, Washington, and so forth and so on, they now own and control hundreds of thousands of formerly single-family owner-occupied houses. And they're gouging those tenants. They're not only raising the rents, but they charge them fees for this, fee for that. It's sort of like the airline model of how you can get money out of people. They have lawyers and so forth and so on. So those creatures, those corporations or limited partnerships, especially when they're out of town, how do you control them? And you're subject to local law, yeah. You maybe even have Missouri law, but at some point in time, they can be, again, owned in California. In fact, the house across the street from me was owned by a company in California, and their management agent was based in Tennessee. So there was no access to a local person to hold them to task. So again, somehow that needs to be figured out in terms of the legislation. How do you hold these fake people, as it were, corporations, to task? I noticed that the advisory task force has 2 appointees representing the short-term rental owners, but only 1 representing residents. I think it should be. I think you need to add another resident on that short-term task force, so there's 2 and 2. Then there's a hotel person and another, I think, the Board of the Public Service, a city employees on that thing. So I would just recommend slight modification to that. Now, the short-term certificates of inspection, and this is my best reading of the bill, I may be wrong, do not expire until there's a change in ownership, even though they may have multiple short-term tenants during the year. Landlords must get conservation inspections after 1 year if tenants change. So I do not understand why the preference is given to the short-term rental owners to only get a certificate, which goes on forever. The inspection lasts forever until they sell the property. Let's have a level playing field. Again, I was a landlord for 45 years. And again, so I'm arguing that the short-term owner should have to get an annual certificate of inspection. The price for these inspections, if I am a landlord, I'm paying $90 for my inspection. Let's say maybe $90 a year if I'm unlucky enough to have a tenant that only lasts 1 year. The fees here are $100 or $200. One of the conversations I've had is that the city doesn't have the money to hire a whole lot of inspectors. We need enough inspectors to keep track of these short-term rentals, so let's raise the fees to a level adequate to fund additional inspectors. If it's $300 per short-term rental, fine. The key thing is to have enough city housing inspectors to take care of being able to inspect these short-term rentals once a year. The other thing, and I've given you an overview of the housing conservation thing, is housing conservation limits residents to 3 unrelated adults. There's short-term rentals, the one across the street from me, which has been sold now to, I think, an owner-occupant, advertised for 12 people. I happened to watch as people left that. They were there for the weekend, parents and children. They had parked 5 cars on the street. So again, and I've given you an example of one that's a few blocks from me, where they advertise that they can have 14 guests. It's a building that says it has 4 bedrooms. Now, just for the hell of it, I got onto the Airbnb site and I said 14 adults, and it was fine. It accepted that. So again, there's got to be some means of saying to them that city ordinance is you can't have more than 3 unrelated adults. I'm not saying anything about the children, and that needs to be applied to all these short-term rentals. So they can't advertise that can have 8 people or 12 people or whatever it is. And my issue is, again, my neighborhood survived, and I go back long enough, sorry to say, gee, 50 years. Oh, God, whoever thought I'd be able to think of 50 years. But we were block-busted, white flight, and we survived as a diverse neighborhood, which we still are, a stable, diverse neighborhood, because you got to know your neighbors. You knew who lived next door to you. You knew who lived across the street. And if somebody went in and out of that house or apartment that you know didn't belong there, you'd call the police. If you have these short-term rentals where who the people are changes from day to day or weekend to weekend or whatever it is, you have no way of knowing, who's supposed to be there. And we still have some burglaries, so again, the issue of being able to spot who should or should not be in a house is important. We're not a high crime area, but we certainly have enough that these are still important things to be able to, I better call the police. Somebody's there that's not supposed to be there. As a landlord, I instructed my tenants in certain things. One of the places I owned was next door to me. The advantage for them is if I didn't make repairs quickly, and I always did, they could come over and ring my doorbell. They knew where I was. I wasn't some LLC or corporation. But the other thing is I had interaction with them. I could say, we always turn our porch lights on at night. And if they weren't doing that, I'd go and remind them. This is what you do with the trash. This is what you do if you see something, you call the police. So there was heavy interaction between myself and my tenants and also to get them involved in the neighborhood. Again, long-term residents, whether they're renters or owners, are people who come to like the neighborhood. They go to neighborhood events, they get to know their neighbors, and they contribute to the stability of the neighborhood. So somewhere in there, we have to make sure that short-term rentals don't start undercutting neighborhood stability. Maybe it's the limits of how many could be on a block or whatever, but we need to figure out some way to build in the structure that requires, that leaves the balance of neighborhood stability in the hands of resident owners or long-term tenants. I mean, I was proud. I always kept my rents a little bit below market, and I had several tenants that stayed for 7 years. I had one woman who stayed with me for 10 years. My rent was low enough at the end of 10 years, she saved up enough, and she was able to buy a house. But that was important. I had a number of tenants who either bought into the neighborhood because they came to love the neighborhood, or they bought into the city because my neighborhood's gotten a little bit more expensive because of gentrification. But young couples with children, the very kind of people we need to keep in St. Louis. I respect, again, the comments about being ambassadors, and that's why I have no issue with owner-occupied short-term rentals.
Thank you, but hang on, I know we're going to have a couple of questions, but,
Sure.
And I asked Lou, who's our attorney, in case I'm saying something wrong, he'll hit me or something, I
Sure.
guess. I can give him this hammer, and he can, so,
He slap his hands.
Or something like it. So the reason, and maybe I could be wrong, but the reason we can't charge $3 or $4 or $5 or $100, we're pretty regulated by the state. We can charge for fees for service. So within what it costs us to go out and send inspectors out and do that, the same with trash, but when we start getting outside of that, then it does have to go to the voters. And is that, yeah. So I got, that's a correct. So that's why, and I don't know, and he'll tell me later, I do agree, I don't think we can charge two-tier fees. I don't think we can treat one person differently than another. Or he'll tell me later. He don't want to comment until he reads, he likes to research everything. But
Good for him.
I don't think you can charge two-tier fees. I do think the plat and petition and everything going over in HUD's is the answer to this. That's going to limit even one on your block if the neighbors feel that they shouldn't. And that was the same with if I want to put a bar on your block, it's the same, although there's been some changes. If I want to put a massage parlor, and they're very legitimate. In fact, I get massages. But, they do have to do plat and petition. Now, that might have changed a little bit. So the best way to regulate this is to, through plat and petition, if we can legally get that. Because I agree that we should charge a fee. And I believe we should be able to take the permit away from anyone that, and not allow them to operate. I agree with that. It seems like a lot of my neighbors and the things that I'm getting are telling me, even though they're already legitimate, you can put them anywhere, they feel that by charging a fee, the feedback I've got on this particular bill, that by charging a fee, we're basically, as a city, legitimizing them, saying, without the regulation of where they can go, once we collect your $100, you can buy the whole block up, So, I mean, that's been the concern. And I think, and I'm glad that Alderwoman Navarro's here because I know there might be a few little changes, and the realtors that I've talked to in particular don't really have a problem with a fee. They have a problem with some of the other stuff, but not so much a fee because they also want to make sure that they have someone good and that Airbnb gets a good, reputation and that, and you're right, or actually, the guy who talked before, you're right. If I'm going to Lake of the Ozarks, I'm probably staying in an Airbnb, and I also lie. If it says 4 people, I bring my family, my kids, cousins, hey, we're all in here. You could take the couch, you got the floor. One of the things I thought would be nice is that they would have to post a phone number on the outside of their building that, you can call. I do know neighbors have a recourse to make something a problem property. The issue with that is that's a 2 or 3 year project that, you got to get them on the list and they have to abate the, So, I mean, this has been a tough one because I actually started on this probably 3 or 4 years ago. And it seems like every time we try to move, I get less flack from the Airbnb people because they feel, well, yeah, we welcome a permit process. And we want to know that when people come that but then the people that have them on their block are going, oh, then as a city we're legitimizing them. So when you pass something like this, at least the feedback I got is, now you've just opened up our whole block. Then everybody that wants to, they can say, no, I got my $100 permit and I'm going to, So that's kind of been what's sort of difficult with this legislation, and I like what's going on in HUD's. But I'm going to let Alderwoman Navarro.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I do just want to clarify, the bill that's in HUD's does not require plat and petition. There is a zoning piece to it, but it doesn't require plat and petition. So just if anybody was concerned about that or had questions. Dan, Dan, the one thing
Latin petition.
that's what, like for a liquor license where you have to go within 200-foot radius and get signatures.
Okay.
So it would be a conditional use hearing, which is different than plat and petition. In terms of you had asked about the 180 days, and I just wanted to clarify that the effective date for this is just when this goes into effect, because we know that the building division, if we take everybody who's been doing short-term rental and say, you've got to show up tomorrow and get a permit, there's no way the building division could
Sure.
accommodate that. So the idea is it really is giving the building division time to go through all of those applications. So within those 180 days, you have to apply. But then after that 180 days is over, that's it. If next year, if this were to pass and go into effect, in a year, if you wanted to start a short-term rental, you would have to show up on day one to get a permit. So that 180 days is just to give the folks who have been doing it right now, we're not going to say you have to shut down until the building division gets to your home. So it just kind of grandfathers you in for that first 180 days, and then after that, everybody needs to comply the first day they start to do this.
Okay.
So,
Can I
but thank you.
respond briefly to Alderman Vaccaro? Sure. Oh, by all means.
I'm taking notes as you're
Okay.
talking, so if you want to let me know. And as we've said, this is all being recorded, so.
And he raised a very good point about that it has to be fee for service. So if in fact the $90 or $150 that I pay as a landlord to get my place inspected, and I will urge annual inspections, that should be changed, is in effect justified by the number of inspectors needed. Wouldn't it be possible then start off with $100 or $200 or whatever the number is, and then see how many people register for A, B, and Bs to have Airbnbs, and then say, aha, to inspect all these things annually, we now need to add 10 inspectors. And so then somebody does a budget and says, aha, these 10 inspectors are going to cost the city $50,000 each. We need $500,000, and say, aha, we now have 200 Airbnbs, and then you then adjust the fee to reflect the cost of the additional inspectors. So then nobody could challenge and say this is beyond the cost. You could say this is the actual cost of the money we need to raise to have these additional inspectors. Sort of what's the word?
Well, the Hancock Amendment is what stops us.
But you understand what I'm trying to do is to sort of get to the way to cut the Gordian knot, where you can then adjust the fee once you get a feeling for how many additional inspectors are needed for these Airbnb inspections. You could then adjust the fee to pay for them, and nobody could challenge it.
Well, they would, because what they would say is that these inspectors are not solely only for those. Those inspectors would be not only inspecting Airbnb, they would be inspecting buildings and whatnot. And then we would have to justify under the Hancock Amendment, we would have to justify that it's not a tax. We can charge for fees for service, and that's how we get
Right.
around the trash
Right.
thing. You know, it costs us, in fact, we actually still lose money on the trash thing, but we can charge for fees for service.
Right.
But when that fee becomes more than it costs us to actually do it, it becomes a tax, and then it would have to go to the voters.
Well, what if you segregated the additional housing inspectors and called them Airbnb conservation inspectors, and then it would be a separate budget item?
And you could, but what happens once the Airbnbs, they're not going, once this is all caught up to speed, you're not going to have, I'm just saying, they would, the openings for lawsuits.
Sure.
And so they're not going to mess with some small communities that come up with a bunch of rules. New York couldn't get it through, and, they're not going to let St. Louis be the leader in how we regulate this. But we do need to come up with some real, because I got the same issues. The neighbors want them out of my neighborhood.
Sure.
They don't like them, they don't want them on the block. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when I talk to them, they don't want us to do a permit, which I thought was the best, easiest thing, because when we pull the permit, but then they said, well, as a city, we're legitimizing this. And even though they're already legitimate, but they feel like we're almost saying, okay, we're in support of. So
Yeah.
what I'm hoping, and I'm sure it'll get challenged, but what I'm hoping is the plat and petition goes through, and if that goes through, I'm sure they'll challenge it, but that is probably the one best way.
Okay.
You know, and especially if you take the ones that are already there and grandfather them because they were there before the clause, moving forward, if there's plat and petition, that's the one way I know you can regulate, you know.
Okay.
It's just my thought, and did you have anything?
I was just going to say that, yeah, I recognize that we do not have all of the answers for this at the get-go, and which is part of the reason for the task force. They won't necessarily be able to amend the fees because there are a lot of other influences there, but in terms of number of inspectors, the budget comes up every year, and so, you know, we'll have an opportunity to look at how do we need to adjust the numbers and staffing and all of that. So we do recognize that we're going to roll this out, and we're going to need to make changes and adapt and accommodate, so thank you.
Yeah, thinking out of the box, as it were. So, yeah, it's a novel challenge, and therefore you need novel solutions.
Absolutely.
And
When we get this one solved, we might actually be able to solve housing and homelessness while we're at it. These are all, because no matter what, it's really funny, and I'm sure the other aldermen get it. If you do this, we're going to beat you up, we hate you, and you get the other side. If you do this, and to be honest with you, I don't worry about that, but I do worry about that we put out good legislation that if it does go to court, we'll win. And if we put out really poor legislation, and again, I appreciate the two ladies that started this. They got a lot of time in it, and I think they're interested in making sure that what we put out is going to stand. And at least if it goes to court, you know, we got good attorneys, and you know, but we want to win. You know, we want to make sure we put legislation that works.
Well, I'll be happy to share my thoughts, and I'd be willing to serve on the task force, although there'd probably be competition for that. 500 people want to be the residential person, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. Thank you very much for hearing
Oh,
me.
no, God bless, thank you for coming.
All right.
We're gonna move down the list only because we're getting closer to lunch and I'm diabetic. That's true. The good news is we're not all sitting within 6 feet of each other, so nobody should die from coronas today. I hope.
Looks like the first name is Kim, last name Humphreys, maybe?
Oh, Ken? Ken. Ken, how you doing? Come on up. If you can give us your name.
I'm Kim Humphreys. I've been a citizen, a resident of St. Louis for the last 20-plus years, 21. We live in the south side in Holly Hills, and we are Airbnb standalone home owners. We have a property in just south in Dutchtown, which is a mile from our home. Much of what I was going to address has already been covered, so some of this will be quick anecdotal information and just get myself introduced to the group as well. Over the last 3 years, I've been, out of necessity, developing a self-employment plan. There's 3 tiers to it, and one of them is this property. And we've owned a few homes, and we identified and spotted a place, and like I said, is South Dutchtown, block off Grand. When we bought it, it was an extremely degraded, scruffy property. We had it inspected. It had good bones. We moved ahead, and the neighbors immediately became curious. Nice, quiet block, good folks, partly rental, partly owners, and they were curious who we were, what we were doing, but extremely warmly received. It was it was entertaining to go through the process. Later, you know, are you going to sell it? Are you going to flip it? Are you going to live in it? We dealt with it, you know, all of that, and we made a lot of friends. Since that time, you know, we had some ideas about who our client base were and who we might go after to come and work with us. But two people from the neighborhood used us for personal reasons, for family overflow at holidays or for special events, which is something that I never anticipated, that we'd be a service directly to the neighborhood. That really pleased me. That showed, you know, more than acceptance, that they believed in the business as well. We opened late quarter, fourth quarter 2018, and it's, you know, there was quite a bit of engagement and new discussion, and so it's been kind of an interesting ride from there to here, from what we thought we were getting into, and quite a few changes that, you know, so far we're, you know, doing fine. There are two things. One that I'd like to stress that disturbs is the wrong word, but the investor-owned class. I live a mile from my property. I sit on it like a mother hen. We still do the cleaning, even and charge a cleaning deposit. I mow the yard. We do a lot of the sweat equity work in it as well, and plan others accordingly. But I don't feel that I'm in the same class as the person with a 900 property portfolio and multiple property managers who doesn't live in the region. And, you know, I feel like that category is far too broad, and that perhaps some other descriptor could be brought to the forefront that shows, you know, if you live within a mile, 2 miles, if you have daily, what's your contact with your property, daily, weekly, monthly. You know, I drove by on the way here today and the alley to see how things were at my baby. Just a little, you know, I'd like to chime in on that one as well. The 31-day rule, for lack of a better word, had confused me. I didn't know until just now that there was no effect. I didn't know what happened after that 31-day passed, and was it a vacuum? Were there new rules? I know the tax situation changes, and I was pleased to hear that come up today. So, like I said, much of what I was going to mention, there's no reason to cover it twice. There's plenty of other people in line. Kim Humphreys, long-term St. Louis, love it. And we do a lot with longer-term people, travel nurses. I have contacts in the arts, in music, in theater. These are all people who come to town who need places to live exactly of this type. And they need unusual times, 53 days, 100 days, and they don't want to live in a hotel. They want to be able to come here and conduct their lives, and this is a great answer for them. We built something based on what we like on the road. We've been users for some time. We brought it here. We've gotten nothing but 5-star, I'm going to brag, nothing but 5-star reviews, and we got it right, and we brought a very nice product to a block that really needed it, and other people responded as well by taking up their property a little better. The yards look better, the houses got painted, and people were a little more on board, or a little more proud of the block, and we were glad to be part of it.
Well, thank you. You know, one of the things that, you know, and I don't know if it's in either one of these, but, and possibly something could be added in, but we could, for saturation, I know that limit like check cashing places and all that to somebody in an area that, I don't know if it's in either one of these, but it might be something that could be put in that says you can't have more than a certain amount. You know, in other words, you can't put a check cashing place near a school. It has to be, you know, all those rules have stuck. And I don't know if that's in the other one or not.
It's not in here. We've gotten a lot of legal advice on, you know, limiting the number to a block face, that sort of thing. So it's definitely something we've been considering and talking about and have been open to amendments. We just need to get a legal opinion that says that will hold up.
And I'm here to learn too, and, you know, what happens. That's why these committee hearings, and sometimes it does take a couple of years to get something through, but it's a learning process. They know more about this than I do. I learned a little last week, and I'm learning a little more today, but thank you.
Well, and just to continue one more notion, the idea of too many Airbnbs, it's a self-regulating industry as far as I can see. I know a number of markets around the country, and prices vary radically. St. Louis is a bargain in many, many respects, but if you have more units, you have to drop prices to get clients, and there's a point where, you know, people won't build anymore because they can't they won't make any more money. There's a finite number, although I think it's increasing, of guests and visitors and business people coming with specific needs, but you know, people won't build, you know, for a 2% profit.
Well, but what was brought out last week, and the only reason I say that, and I'm going to move it on, but the only reason I say that, what was brought out last week in conversations after and even during, were people that were starting to get concerned that it would hurt home ownership if people come in and start buying up these, going, well, I can put 6 of them over here, you know, and that was brought up last week. And so I'm just commenting.
You
It's
know,
not
there might be areas where people try to concentrate, but those are also areas that are popular where people want to hold their property because they value it. It's not, you know, you're not going to get it at a bargain price, which will make it more difficult to put an Airbnb in it. It's got a lot of self-regulation attached to it.
I appreciate it. I'm going to move on just because we're going to let other people come up, but
Sure.
thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
And that was my friend Kim Tucci's name too, was Kim. What is that short for? Or is it just Kim?
I surprise people occasionally when they're not expecting the beard.
No, well, Kim Tucci was my good friend, and I don't even know what it's short for, so
Thank you.
thank you.
Carol.
Carol, if you can just give us your name for the tape.
Yes, my name is Carol Ray. I am a homeowner. First of all, I see that these are all owners as opposed to residents. And just for the record, I'd like to say, I had organized many neighbors to come, but I'm not laying any blame, but because of all the different timings of all these meetings, I unfortunately am the only one who was able to attend today.
That's fine, but we were pretty much, this one was definitely, if there was
No,
any
there was one
confusion-
for a couple weeks ago that was
Right.
on that email for a totally different date.
Right.
Then it was going to be today. Then we were told on Monday, midday, it was going to be Tuesday.
Well,
And then suddenly it was going to be back on. We're working class people.
Right.
We can't take off in the middle of the day. These meetings, in my opinion, need to be held at a time when the general public is able to attend. Because this, like the owners, who is their business,
Right.
this is our lives. And to be able to have a voice, we need to be able to make the meetings at a time when most of the general public are able to attend.
If there's nothing stopping us from having a meeting next week or the week after. If the sponsors want to have an evening meeting, I am certainly open to having an evening meeting. I think right now it's very much an education thing for us. And again, if the sponsors decide that they want to have an evening meeting, it will be the only thing on the agenda, and I do not have a problem holding an evening meeting. If the sponsors have a place that they would like to hold these other than here, and we could find a place, I'm perfectly willing to hold them out in the neighborhood. I think, again, this is all, at this point, all we're really trying to do is put together legislation that makes sense, that we're not going to get sued over, that's going to spend the next 2 or 3 years in court going back and forth, you know, that it's not going to be amenable to anybody. So I'm not opposed to holding evening meetings, even though we're going to be on a 5 or 6 week break or whatever. Our session doesn't end until April, I don't know. Anyway, we got some time. I don't know the exact dates. So that's up to the sponsors. And I can tell you, it would be the only thing on the agenda, nothing else, because at this point, it's still just going to be much of a learning, listening kind of a thing, so that when they come back in April, they can introduce legislation with some changes that seem to fit everybody, if that makes sense. And certainly, you know, my email, my cell phone, people are, well, you know, my cell phone number, and I'll tell you, it's 314-718-0131, and that'll be on the tape also. My email address, the same as every alderman here, is our last name. In my case, it's Vaccaro, Vaccaro, J. So that's literally everybody, even if you're trying to get a hold of the mayor, she's Cruz, you know, J, and it's at STLOUIS, so it's St. Louis spelled out, -mo.gov. And a lot of times when I answer my emails, because everything comes to my phone, I get it better that way. A lot of things when I answer them come out as Car Wash Daddy, because I was in the car wash business. I own that. We're at Hampton 44. So if you see something from Car Wash Daddy, please don't spam it. It's me. So I just thought I'd put that out there. Anyway, so, and I'm certainly amenable to an evening meeting, even in the neighborhood, if that's what everybody wants to do. That, I could promise the sponsor and co-sponsor that they just need to let me know, and we'll pick a date. If we have it here, it can't be around, although the way it looks, we're not going to be able to have fans at any of the games anyway. But because of parking, if we have it here, it can't be on the day that there's a Cardinal or a hockey game or something that would not allow parking. So I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and if that could be arranged, it'd be great. So, number one, addressing the issue of the fact that the neighbors should have a hearsay in this. This is my scenario. I came home late at night one evening, and the house next door to me, which had been vacant for about 8 or 9 months, suddenly had 3 vehicles in the driveway, and our driveways are inches apart from each other, and a man standing in the driveway. He came over and approached me, introduced himself, and said, "Hey, I've just rented this house from your neighbor, and I'm going to turn it into an Airbnb. And that's what these cars are doing here. And I've done it with his blessing." I didn't want to upset the neighbors, so I asked him, "Will the neighbors care?" And his reply was, "No, they won't care at all." This is a gentleman who, during the time he occupied the home, never spoke to any of the neighbors, not even to say hello. He then proceeded to tell this third party that I'm a flight attendant, I'm never home, so why would I care? He also said that the neighbor on the other side was a recluse, so why would he care? So the neighbors won't care, go ahead, do whatever you want. This owner, third-party owner, has on his website, "To respect your privacy, you'll never see me." I have rules. You can't have parties. You can't have pets. You can't smoke. But yet you'll never see me, so who's going to regulate this? Hence, I'll come home late at night, and I will say there is a daily, almost daily turnover at this home. I'll have people smoking outside my home because they say they're not allowed to smoke in there. I have pets in my backyard for people who are not allowed to have pets. We have party limousines pull up all the time. Someone else addressed the issue of occupancy. I've been in that home. There are 3 bedrooms, and he has a queen bed in those rooms. We have witnessed one day with other neighbors, people coming out with sleeping bags and pillows. Shortly thereafter, the same afternoon, this third-party owner happened to come by. We addressed the issue with him, and he said, oh, no, they're just not young kids sleeping on the floor. They're using those on the beds. Really? They're not supposed to have guests. There are wild parties there all the time, blocking our driveways multiple times. You can only call the police so many times. There's no parking left on the street because of all their parties. Happened again for Mardi Gras. There is absolutely no regulation. The owner, who is actually renting to the third party, has been approached numerous times. He could care less. He's like, I'm not breaking any laws. I can do whatever I want to do. Tough luck. There's a city ordinance saying you cannot operate anything of this nature within 500 feet of a school. St. Raphael's Elementary School is 4 doors down from me. But because at the time the word Airbnb did not exist, it can't be enforced. There are children who pass by my door every day, grade school children. I myself have 2 young granddaughters. Are these pedophiles? One day there was a meth lab going on. Unfortunately, by the time the police actually got there, they had packed up and gone. I have lived here all my life. I bought a home in a neighborhood in St. Raphael's Parish for community. I bought a home to live next door to neighbors. I was a single mom with 2 children. I am a single senior citizen now. If I come home to strangers, I am now living in fear. I lived in fear in my own home. I bought this home so I could have a neighbors. If I have issues, if I have problems, if I need help, I go next door, I ring a doorbell, and I know those people are my neighbors and they will help me. Now I have nothing but strangers. There is daily turnover here. There is no supervision. These properties should not be allowed in single-dwelling residential neighborhoods. St. Louis Hills is one of the last stable neighborhoods in this city. You're trying to stabilize the city. This is destabilizing a community. Also, this home was my nest egg. I put all my blood, sweat, and tears in buying my home. No one is going to buy a home when they say to you, and who are your neighbors? Because this is the type of community. It's a community. Who are your neighbors? And I'm saying, I don't know. They change daily. You don't know what elements you're bringing into this neighborhood. They could be rapists. They could be anybody. Did I hear? I'm sorry. I'm sorry I have the floor, and I would appreciate, I respectfully listen to everyone else.
I agree.
And I do not appreciate the fact that I am being juggled from the audience.
And if it would continue, I'll ask her to step out or have the marshal take her out. So continue, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm not going to continue with her in the audience. I don't think this is fair.
Well, it's fair. She's fine. If she does it again, she's been warned, and she won't react again. But, and I understand what you're saying, and I understand that you don't know the people that are coming in. I understand that certainly this, like a pedophile or, I don't know how they tell rapists, but you don't know who's coming in the neighborhood.
That's my point.
I understand that. I'm a homeowner too, and I get all this. I just, I get it. I mean, I am on the side of the homeowners, and I sat with the people from 16 and 23 that are most affected by this. I started on this 3 years ago. It's about effective legislation to deal with it. If we could just say no, we would. I don't think there's an alderman out there that wouldn't say, gee, you know what, I'm going to stand up for my neighbors. They don't want this, and no. The issue becomes there's tons of all these different laws. There's, I'm losing my train of thought, but people have rights. You know, there's houses in my neighborhood that I would love to go kick the door in and tell them, get out. But they have due process. And that's what slows, I know sometimes figure, well, my alderman's just not doing his job. That's been a problem property. It takes literally, I started on one 12 years ago and finally got the thing tore down because of due process. They go to court, there's attorneys, you know, it goes back and forth. The biggest fine that we can issue in the city of St. Louis is $500. Most of the time, it's only $25. It's because we're bound by the Hancock Amendment, we're bound by state law, that believe me, if I had that power to say, this is a problem property and you're out of here, we had one in our neighborhood. We got some Airbnbs, and we had one, and it's only one that I've gotten complaints about, and it's because of people coming and partying, and they're on vacation, and we're working, and they're up at midnight and whatever, drinking and having a good time. We did come to somewhat of an agreement with the owners, and, you know, I know that the neighbors that are around it are mad at me, saying, Joe, you're not doing anything to deal with it. Again, because we're bound by all these laws, we're just a municipality, we're bound by state law, federal law, and that's what makes it difficult. And due process, the same thing that you would want if we came to your house and said, you're a hoarder or you got a bunch of stuff in your yard, and the neighbors call and complain, which they do. We can't just go in and, you know, basically say, we're taking everything off your property because you have due process. And I just want you to understand, we're on your side. I don't think there's one alderman here that would love to see this be very regulated, somehow limit what's in an area. But again, we're bound by law. Airbnb has way more money than the city of St. Louis. But if we can put together, and again, I will say that the two alder people that have been working on this are doing the best they can. We're going to try, you know, I know they're trying. We want legislation that isn't just thrown together that ends up in court. And you'll see sometimes legislation like that. The minimum wage in the city of St. Louis, and everybody got mad at me over that, saying, well, but I said, we can't do that because you can't just say that businesses in the city of St. Louis are going to be held to a different standard when there's state law that regulates that. And sure enough, so we passed it, and it lasted a week, and it changed. So in this isn't, you know, whoever, you're all the person and the all the people here, we're on the side of the people. It's putting together legislation that we know is going to be able to pass and pass the test of laws. Just like when the other gentleman was up talking about fees. Well, why don't we charge a higher fee? We can't. We can't even charge more than $25 for most fees. So, like, when you got a house that's got housing violations and they send a letter, they just have to pay $25 for each fee, and it starts all over until you can get it in court. And then when you get it in court, it seems to go on for, again, I have two houses. One finally got taken care of. Literally, this is my 12th year here. That's how long it took, because of due process. But it's the same thing that you would want. You would want due process. You wouldn't want the neighbors to say, I'm pretty sure she's got a drug house there, and then have the city come in, knock your door down to find out that really the neighbors, you don't have it. So, but that's what slows it down. I just want you to understand, I get 100%, and I don't appreciate when you laughed. I think I get mad at people that snap during meetings. I always say, do that and clear the room, because I always want respect, the same respect that you're up here speaking, the same respect that when we're talking, because I know we have groups in here that, want to snap and do stuff when I'm talking because they feel that I'm an old guy and I'm I've been called a misogynist and everything else, but, again, we're here to pass legislation that's going to stay, that's going to be here, and unfortunately, they did a lot of hard work. How many years has this been that you've been working on this thing?
Well, Alderwoman Ingrassia started about 3 years ago, and then I joined in about 2.5 years ago.
And I started about 4 and gave up because I just kept running into walls. But I really think that by the beginning part of the next session, we are going to come up with reasonable legislation. And I do want to see that come out of HUDs. And I do think that there's things in there that we've been able to do in the past, such as plat and petition. We have plat and petition on several things, and I think you can get plat and petition, and it would probably hold up in court. But to just, I just don't want you to think that I don't understand everything you're saying. I have the same issues. My kids, if you're familiar with Watson.
I live in Jamison and Watson, yes.
Okay, so I'm probably your alderman.
Pardon?
I possibly am your alderman. It depends on where you're at.
No, it's Tom Oldenburg's my alderman.
Okay, but I get people all the time wanting me because of Big E's, because of Trattoria Marcella, because of St. Joan of Arc Church. They all want residential parking, which we actually could do, but it would run every business out of the city. And I know my granddaughter that I worry about, they live on that corner house there by Big E's.
No.
Sometimes she has to park as much as 10 houses away, and yet I don't turn my son's block into, which is also my block, into residential parking because it just doesn't. But I just don't want you to think that I'm not listening and that I understand your compassion for this. I am 100% with you on what you're saying. I disagree with the young lady that was giggling because you don't know. We live in a great area and we have very little crime, and I know that people worry about crime and people coming in that don't necessarily live in the neighborhood. But on the other side, Airbnb, I think, and I don't know how many our neighborhood has, but there's only been one that I've gotten, serious complaints over. And I think we addressed it, but I don't know. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. If you would please go on, and we're going to listen, and we're going to be very polite. And any suggestions, we're going to try to put things in there.
Well, number one, I thank you for your remarks. I am aware that you've been on the books for a number of years, very well aware of that. But my quality of life, I have no quality of life anymore. Like I said, I'm now living in fear in my own home. Every single day, there are different people there. As far as plat and petition, yes, we deserve a voice, because this is not what I bought into. If I wanted to live next to a transient hotel, I would have bought next to a transient hotel. But as far as the grandfather clause, that's totally unreasonable to me. Number one, that means I will never get rid of my problem. They snuck in under the wire before there was anything on the books. This happened to me overnight. Overnight, my life and the life of all our neighbors changed. And it's not fair. We're citizens too. This was a residential area. I did not buy into a commercial area. And I want to know how suddenly they can start running commercial property in a residential home.
And again, I promise I'll look into it for a night meeting, but I don't think that we can create a law that goes backwards.
Well,
That's retro, that would go.
then
we can
this
create laws.
that's the whole point, is that there's no point me being here, because I will always live with this problem, and you will not have done one thing for me. Why should I? Okay, so say someone murders someone. Well, it wasn't on the books as a law against murder at the time, so you can walk scot-free and just go here going forward that we're going to prosecute you. No, that will not help me. I will continue to live in fear. My home, our taxes were raised, property taxes were raised as everyone's were, and yet my home is worthless. There's no one who's going to come and buy a home that is next to an Airbnb. So then this is pointless. I shouldn't have even come. If you're going to start with that premise,
No, but
no.
I'm just trying to tell the truth. I mean, I don't, you know,
Then-
that I know of. Maybe I'm wrong, and we'll check into it, but that I'm aware of, I don't think you can create laws that go backwards. I think any laws always go forward.
Maybe we can ask Lou to look into it. We should probably just keep
Okay, so, okay, so Alderwoman saying, we will ask the attorney to look into it.
I was going to say, because otherwise, we're stuck with this problem, because this man will not cease. He's been approached by government, he's been approached by neighbors, and his answer is, I'm not breaking the law, I can do whatever I want to do, and hence he will continue, and so will the third party, because this is even one removed. Not only does he not know who's there, the third party doesn't know who's there.
Well, I mean, and I would say if this was in my ward, things that I would suggest is that whenever it's loud or
We've been it's every day. We don't have time.
No,
We work. We've called the police.
Okay,
They-
so by calls for service to the police,
We've had building inspectors, we've had people,
but it
It's
should,
not been
it should be able to be put on a nuisance property list. It should
we
be
shouldn't
able
have to sit there and police this every single day. This has been going on almost a year.
So,
We shouldn't have to be on our guard. This puts it on us. There should be a law to protect us. We shouldn't have to keep picking up the phone. People are at work. We run busy lives. The onus should not be on us to have to keep calling.
but,
And even as a nuisance property, nothing's being done. If you put in a grandfather clause, you have just shot us in the foot. You have just shut us down. I'm not even going to bother to organize anybody anymore because you're going to allow my neighbor to continue.
I don't know that we're putting a grandfather clause in. I think that you can't create a law. That's just my thought. I could be wrong. Alderwoman Navarro is going to look into that. I'm just making suggestions that I would do a few things, like if you're calling and you get on a nuisance property list, you can get condemned for occupancy.
We've tried it all.
Really?
We've done these. We've taken these steps.
And we've had success,
Well, we
you
haven't.
know, and you can have no parking signs if they're blocking your driveway, put on either side of your driveway, facing your driveway, and if a car's there, the police will come and tow it. I mean, there's things you can do with what you have now, and we're gonna look into it, and because I'm giving you my opinion. I'm certainly not an attorney. I'm a auto mechanic and a car wash guy, and I'm not an attorney. So that's why I was asking him to sit up here in case I was wrong about what I understand on the Hancock Amendment. So maybe we can, but Alderwoman Navarro said she is going to look into that. And maybe if we set up a night meeting, maybe we can have a little bit more, and maybe have a better understanding. Again, like I said, this is a learning process. It's a learning process for me. The different aldermen, even though they're not here, they'll watch this tape. You know, even though they're stuck in other meetings, it's a learning process for us. We're not, well, some of us are attorneys, but I'm certainly not.
Can I just make one comment? And then I know we've got other people we want to hear from. I think just like we know you can have a long-term neighbor who's a problem day after day, we know that these short-term rentals can create a problem. And the issue that I've seen in the neighborhood where I live is that the nuisance procedure is not sufficient to address problem short-term rentals. And part of that is because the nuisance procedure assumes that the problem is coming from the property owner. And when you have a short-term rental, the issue is it's a new person. And so the nuisance process essentially kicks that out of the system because it says, oh, that guest left, so it's all fine. They set it back to square one. And so what we're trying to do with this bill is to then put in a compliance mechanism, essentially, because we realize there's not an appropriate way to enforce and deal with these problematic short-term rentals. And so that's what this bill is doing. It doesn't provide any sort of grandfathering in. Anybody who's doing a short-term rental is going to have to go through this process. We'll know where they are, and we'll have a process for dealing with them that we do not have right now. So I appreciate you sharing your issues because those are very concerning. Not everybody is a responsible host, and that's why we need a policy to deal with all of those folks who aren't engaging with their neighbors, who aren't being respectful. We can write one policy that's going to have to apply to the whole city. So I think it's really important that we hear about the issues that you've dealt with so that we can have a law that will address that and at least give the neighbors some recourse. It will be somewhat dependent on the neighbors to bring these issues to the city's attention, just like it is if you have a problem neighbor who's got a loud barking dog, or whatever it is. The city doesn't drive around looking for bad behavior. We do have to rely on neighbors bringing that to the city's attention. But at least now with this bill, there will be a mechanism to respond, as opposed to right now, you can complain to the city, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. That's what we are trying to do with this bill, is to address the situations that you're describing. So thank you.
Okay, I just have one last question. What's the difference between conditional use and plat and petition?
Plat and petition is, you have to, in order for it to be approved, you have to get a certain number of signatures within, I think it's a 200-foot radius or whatever it is in the statute. Conditional use means, and it's a public hearing. Anybody can show up and testify about whether or not they think that permit should be granted. And then it can be, and it goes through the zoning, whereas plat and petition, I think, goes really through the excise committee. Well, it depends on how it's set up. But there are a lot of issues with plat and petition because it's usually based on, you've got to track down often the owners, which is not always the residents who are there. So the conditional use hearing opens it up to more people to be able to weigh in. And that's one of the issues. I'm not the zoning administrator, and I'm sure there's more, but that's the big one.
Okay, thank you for your time. I appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Brian?
Brian, I see you brought a mask. You're worried about us, but
Protecting you, right?
We
We're
have to-
keeping a safe distance. So my name is Brian Young. I'm a local real estate broker. I've been in business for 31 years here in St. Louis. I've done a variety of things through that time. One of the things I am currently is I'm a resident in the city, happen to be your ward. And I've been a property owner for most of that time. We are also short-term property owners. And by the definition, I guess you would throw us in the investment category, because under the current definitions, there's some real issues with it. I'll get to that, some of that in a minute, but under the current definition, even if I moved into the building that is our short-term rental, I still wouldn't qualify. I would still be an investor-owned property because the definitions of units and things are very restrictive. But let me get a little background. So 31 years in real estate. I've been very active, as Joe knows, in being a good community member. Some of our other people have talked about being an ambassador. I consider myself a St. Louisan by choice. I wasn't born here. I choose to live here. I choose to make St. Louis my home. And as such, I take very great stock in making sure that we reach out in every way we can, in any way we can, to help make the community better. One of the ways I do that, I have 4 investor groups. We have 5,000 members of local investors who own properties. Now, not all of them are short-term property owners, but some subset of them are. And our whole focus in that set of groups is to educate people on what you should do and what you shouldn't do and what the resources are that are available to you. And it helps greatly because many times people become investors the same way they become short-term property owners. Accidental. You tried to sell a house, didn't sell, you decided to rent it, as one example. My fiance and I, we got into the short-term rental side of the property owner business very simply because we had some rentals we couldn't get them rented. There were too many new things coming on market. The market's been very good, so people with good credit tend to buy when they can, and a whole lot of market factors. Long story short, we said, okay, let's stage this. And we staged it. And we said, well, if we're going to do that, we might as well do short-term rentals because we've traveled all over the world and stayed in short-term rentals. Every experience has been fantastic. The hosts have been fantastic. And we said, hey, this is something we really like to do. We can be ambassadors for our city. St. Louis needs all the good PR we can get. And so when people come to St. Louis, we're meeting them. We don't just, who's that?
God getting mad.
Yeah?
That's supposed to be a tornado warning.
So I speak and the God's listening. So anyway, the reality is we said we can be great ambassadors for St. Louis. And when people come, we want to meet our guests. We want to walk them through our spaces because we're proud of them. And we enjoy the fact that we've created some great spaces. And we want to tell them, here are the rules. This is where your trash goes. This is where you park, where you don't park. This is what you do, you don't do. And, you know, we want to tell them, hey, there is the zoo down the street. And there is this great restaurant over here. And there is this and that. And we tell them all those things because we want their experience to be good, not just for us, but for them and for our neighbors. And so if you think about who are we attracting, it's a really important question, who you attract. You attract who you market to. You attract who you want to through your policies and procedures, right? So who do we typically get? Our typical stay is going to be somebody coming to St. Louis on a vacation, okay? Maybe with their family, maybe not. They are going to be business travelers who are here to do business in St. Louis, some of them for longer periods of time, who want to stay in something that feels much more like home. I mean, we're talking about 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 1,000-square-foot spaces, every bit as nice, probably nicer than the space I live in. I mean, so literally everything we try to do very nicely. And we have people who come to the hospitals, who have family members. We've had a lot of people go through the transplant program. Their family members stay with us while they're going through. And then those folks, before they can leave St. Louis, have to stay for a period of time. And so we're close to the hospitals. We have great access. We have traveling nurses. The point is these are good folks who are traveling through, who are having great experiences in our neighborhoods, who are going to not only Southampton and St. Louis Hills and Lindenwood, but all over the city. And we're helping make that experience a great experience for them. Now, there is always a chance that somebody could come, just like with any tenant, with any homeowner, there's a chance you might get a homeowner who's irresponsible, who buys the home down the street, and we've already talked about that. You can have a tenant who comes in, and we do lots of property management all over the area. So you can have great tenants that look great on paper who are just not well adjusted to being on their own for whatever reason. There are problems, right? But the problems are very small in the grand picture of things. Most of the property owners who are doing short-term rental are just like most of the property owners who live in their own home, or most of the property owners who invest in real estate for long-term rentals. Those are good folks. They may not know everything they should and shouldn't do. So one of my points is a big component of this that is still missing from the discussion is almost all the problems that we've talked about could be addressed on an education basis. Okay? And that education doesn't just mean the property owner. It doesn't just mean me, St. Louis property owner, as a short-term rental owner. It means talking to the staff here in City Hall. We go into the City Hall, we talk to people and say, hey, what's the rule for this or that? And we can get a dozen different answers talking to a dozen different people. We can talk to a police officer and say, hey, if we do have a problem, what do we do? And I guarantee you, we will get different answers from different officers. Some officers say, hey, you had a problem, call us, we'll help you solve the problem. Other officers will say, hey, it's a civil matter, we can't touch it. That's an education issue. And so a lot of the things that we are talking about, a lot of the pain that neighbors are having with property owners go to sometimes the property owners don't know what they should and shouldn't do. Some of them don't care. The guy you're dealing with may just not care. And that's a bad property owner, doesn't matter what category they're in. But those are fewer and farther between. Those are not the typical. And so what we're talking about here is legislation that's going to throw everybody into one big basket and treat everybody the same, when we really need something that addresses how to deal with the problem people. Some problem people we can solve with education. We reached out to them, don't do it again. Oh, sorry, didn't realize there was a problem, right? We've heard that here. Some people might need a letter from City Hall. If you keep doing this, it's going to become a problem. You're going to become a nuisance property. We have mechanisms for that. Some of those mechanisms may need to be slightly tweaked or adjusted for specifics of short-term rentals. You were talking about that the nuisance property laws go against the occupant. From a landlording perspective, most landlords will tell you, we don't see it that way. Most of those situations come back to the property owner. And, we have very little control short of evicting somebody on a regular rental. So it's just, there's a disjoint there. So from perspectives, how to bring these perspectives together, a lot of that is education. And I'm very happy to give you a forum for that, very happy to be part of that process and discuss these back and forth, because again, to get some depth and breadth here with 5,000 members, and you were talking about the short-term rental association. We have one that's also in place, and you've talked to a couple other people, and members of more than one. There's a lot of opportunity to get the discussion going. There's also the Association of Realtors that has a lot of touch with a lot of the property owners that we can, again, reach out. Through some of these investment associations, the RIAs in town, we can reach out. So a lot of this can be addressed in that regard. That's the biggest thing, and it's one thing I don't see in this, is, you know, we're trying to legislate it, and it's not so much legislation, but education. If you don't know what the resources are that you have, that's a breakdown, right? If she has resources that you're telling her about, that she's had this problem for a long time, she hasn't known what her resources are, that's a breakdown. If the property owner is, in fact, a responsible owner, they'll react to those things, the things already in place. If they're not, no amount of club is going to get them. They might eventually sell, but they could sell from organization to organization. You know, the shell games are done. We could talk about those. That's a whole other discussion. So, and somebody referenced standing behind the organizational structures. Here's the reality, though. Going back to most of the people, me included, I'm an investor, but I'm just trying to pay bills, right? I'm trying to make my mortgage payment, trying to pay my taxes, trying to pay my insurance, keep the utilities on, and the money I get in my buildings, no matter short-term rental or not, generally goes right back into the buildings. We keep them nice. We keep them nice because we want to attract good people. We want people who stay on the long-term rentals. We want people who come back on our short-term rentals, and we want great ratings because the ratings will kill us if they drop. So, and that's a very big point. I think you had mentioned it. The ratings, it's a self-regulating system. There's also some market dynamic in this. I mean, before COVID-19 and the need for these stupid masks, right? Before that, Airbnb was saying they had a 19% occupancy rate in St. Louis. 19%. That means that most of them aren't being rented, right? If they're being rented, they're being rented often at a greatly discounted rate just to get some revenue, because most people are taking that money to pay bills, and that's why they're in this, right? They're not bad people. It doesn't mean you're bad because you want to get money. Everybody goes to a job to get money. Some people have side gigs to get some money. For some people, that's what this is. The reality is that you're trying to, and I don't envy you at all, you're trying to figure out this giant thing that's new in the market. It's a disruptor pattern, right? Airbnb wasn't around, but people have taken in people in their homes for lots and lots of years. It's just Airbnb happens to be the fancy new name for it. And we generically call them short-term rentals for all the various platforms. But this isn't really that new. The problem is the legislation is trying to catch up with it. And there are a lot of us in various categories. Like, again, I'm an investor, right? But I'm not a big bad investor. I don't have 100 of these things or 5,000 of these things. I'm not somebody coming in from out of town trying to rent the neighbor's house to put a short-term rental in. Personally, I think that's a bad business model. Personally, I think it's a horrible business model for the property owner and for the person who's running it. I just don't think there's a good enough connection there. So I think that's probably one of your points, is maybe the folks who are coming in, renting someone else's property and then subletting it as a short-term rental may be a good place to look for where most of your problems are. Some of the other ones, again, it goes back to the categories are not going to address that real well. There are lots of things that kind of slip through the cracks. And so we need to be able to look at ways to say, okay, a problem owner, regardless of what category you think you want to throw them in, is still a problem owner. Whether they own the house and they live in it, or they rent it long-term, or they rent it short-term, it doesn't matter. Bad behavior is bad behavior, right? So that's where I think the fix needs to be. As far as safety, we already have occupancy permits, and there's a lot of misinformation about how often are we supposed to do them, how long are they good, and a whole bunch of stuff with that. Those things could be clarified. A simple position paper from the city of St. Louis to say, hey, you're thinking about short-term rental, here are the 10 things you need to know. Do you or don't you collect the taxes? You know, we can call to Jeff City and get the same dozen people on the phone and get a dozen different answers. Airbnb collects taxes on a voluntary basis right now for short-term rental owners for the city of St. Louis. It's a voluntary agreement. There was nobody came to them and said, you have to do this, okay? Likewise, nobody's gone to the other platforms. We had a gentleman sitting in the corner over there from Expedia, which is also VRBO. He was sitting over there. They're not collecting taxes for any of the people that they're booking through their platform. And I can tell you property owners have been told everything from they're not due to they are due. And part of that's the definitions. The definitions that all this stuff hangs on are so poorly defined. For example, parts of the legislation talk about condos, specifically condos, no other type of property. And we know there's a lot of other property types. I could go into a whole dissertation on that kind of stuff. By the way, y'all realize you gave a mic to a guy who's in real estate, and I want to talk about real estate, so you might have to shut me down at some point. The point is that there's a lot of things that need to be clarified. One of the things in the legislation at state level about taxes says open to the public. I can tell you, my places are not open to the public. Joe, I know you, but if you walked up right now and said, can I rent? I'm a member of the public. The answer is no. You got to come through a platform, okay? You're going to come to us through some platform who is supposed to vet the people that we bring. We're still going to talk to you if you come through that platform. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions. It's called professional property management. We use professional property management standards with short-term or long-term, doesn't matter. We're going to make sure that we know what you're there for, why you're there. We're going to check your ID when you walk in the door. You don't just get to walk in, because Joe might not be Joe when Joe walks in, right? So we want to know who you are. We want to know how long you're going to be there. I want you to tell me what car you have and where you're going to park it and that kind of thing, because we had a situation where the city decided to cut down trees that we've been asking for 3.5 years to get the trees cut down.
Next week.
And they decided, when we had a guest, I'll be doggone if it wasn't that day, they decided that they needed to cut those trees down. Well, we had the information for that guest, and we were able to call them and say, hey, you got to move your car, because in the next hour, if you don't, the city's going to tow your car. So again, these are professional and prudent property management standards, but it goes back to education and not just saying, okay, you're going to pay so and so much for an inspection. That's only a small piece of this. One of the other things is, when people talk about the taxes, I don't know about others in the room, but I know on my building, values went up, but it wasn't just that. We got reclassified to commercial property. Now, we're still residential. We are 100% residential. There is nothing that's changed there. Some of the people stay longer than 30 days, others stay less than 30 days. You talk to the assessor's office, go down there and talk to them. Even if we gave them information right now and said these people stayed longer than 30 days, these people stayed less, it doesn't matter to them. We've gone through these arguments. We went all the way to the State Tax Commission on that. And so there's still a lot of clarification. There's a lot of issue there. So our taxes tripled. Our insurance doubled, okay? We also got hit with personal property tax. Some areas, people had special business district taxes that kicked in because now it's reclassified. Now you're commercial property. Okay, nothing changed on the zoning. Nobody came to us in advance and said, hey, if you keep doing this 6 months from now, we're going to do this, or 3 months from now, we're going to do this, or at the end of this year. It was retroactive. We found out when the tax bills came out, and they fell out of the mailbox and broke our toes, right? Basically. So property values have generally gone up in the city. And, somebody would mention, nobody will buy my house because it's next to a short-term rental. I don't think that's the case. Certain neighborhoods especially, you put a house on the market, it's gone. There are short-term rental owners that have sold their properties and have had no issues with neighbors. There are neighbors who have sold properties around short-term rental owners and have had no issues. So I know that there's concerns that are valid. If there's a bad property owner, we've got to deal with it. But there are other mechanisms. And like I said, I'm very happy to talk to you about this stuff. Going back to, let's see what other points I've got, because some of this stuff is already covered, but there are also concerns, and Joe, I mentioned it out in the hall before we came in the meeting, about how this stuff layers out. All the laws that City Hall makes or doesn't make impact so many other things. Nothing's in a vacuum. So what you do with short-term rentals it doesn't stand by itself. You have long-term rentals, you have owner-occupied properties. If you're setting up special standards for the short-term rental properties, there can be ripple effects on that. So, for example, what happens if something isn't 100% right in a short-term rental and somebody falls? Okay, does that create a lawsuit issue, a different lawsuit issue? What if somebody happens to have a fire in their long-term rental apartment or their home, but the standard that would have been applied had they been treated as short-term rentals would have been a higher standard? Now does the city take that liability because they recognize some need for higher standard for this group but not that group? Are some of the concerns that are being voiced, are they because people aren't like us? Now I'm going to tell you, I teach fair housing. I'm a big proponent of fair housing. And I hear this stuff. I've had people come up to me and say, I don't want people who aren't like me coming into the house or the apartment or the whatever. And I'm not saying to anybody in this room. I'm not pointing any fingers. But I know that's part of the pushback in some places is that. I'll tell you, and I'll tell you, if you want to come and see how we operate, what our rentals look like, I'd be happy to show you. Again, I'm proud of them. I know we do a great job, and we're always looking to make them better because that's where our money goes.
Well, and that's why we thought licensing. The other thing, and hopefully you're not getting ready to leave, but if you are, I did want to say before you go, I tried to somewhat ban the carriage rides downtown after a couple horses drowned and people were getting hurt. Jeff City said, you're not going to do that. Because in the middle of the state, they don't have the Airbnb and the different issues, and the horses are different. The minimum wage. It would have been nice in the city. We would like to ban guns in the city. I can tell you, at least as far as I know, as we're moving forward with this, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think Jefferson City is already moving in the opposite direction because they got the realtors and up there lobbying against rules on this kind of stuff. At least I was told that. So I just want to let you know, I mean, we're in a, I understand where you're at. I understand where Brian's at, and that's pretty sad.
Well,
but
sorry.
I can tell you that, at least as far as I know, Jeff City's already trying to block stuff like this from happening anywhere. And they did it. They did it on minimum wage. They've done it on guns. They've done it on the horses and carriage rides. I mean, as we're putting this together, they have a whole different outlook on life than we have. But anyway,
Well,
and then Brian, I'm going to
yeah,
ask you.
and I'm just going to throw this out there. So I've said to anyone who's having a problem with a neighbor or a neighboring property, a property owner who happens to be a short-term rental, not only I, but others are very willing to intercede, to go to that property owner and say, hey, look, you're causing problems. You may not even realize you're causing problems. The one in St. Louis Hills that you were referencing, I happen to know which one it was, they didn't even realize they had a problem until the neighbors were very upset. And it's because they didn't interact, they just didn't tell, and people were talking over the fences or in front yards and not talking to the person who owned the property. So that whole situation probably could have gotten headed off very quickly, but that intercession didn't happen. I'm happy to step in and meet with any property owner that you see as a problem, because I do that as part of my ambassadorship. And I do that because I'm in real estate, and I do that because I live in the city. And I did offer to you too, very specifically, very sincerely, I would help you any way I can, any way I can.
And for what it's worth, if you give me the address after this, I will run for calls for service. As long as the alderman for that area is fine with me getting involved, I might be able to help you. I'm pretty good at this after 11 years.
Yeah, should be, right?
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
Anyway, Brian, I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, no
only
problem,
because
no
there's
problem at all.
more.
So like I said, I'm happy to be a resource, be very willing to meet with you, walk through some of those issues. I think most people who are involved with short-term rentals, if we're going to see regulations come, we want them to be smart regulations, not just things that add fees and costs. It needs to be stuff that helps us. You know, if we have a problem, we want police support. If we're going to be treated, you know, with taxes, we need to have some special support there, because, again, our tax bills just have been ridiculous. We have one property owner whose tax bill went from $3,000 to $15,000. And you tell me how that person can take that swallow very often and recuperate. That's a big swallow. So the margins aren't so huge on these like some people think they are, because it's a very cyclical business. And right now, courtesy of COVID and everybody canceling, we're not seeing a whole lot of traffic, and we're seeing a whole lot of cancellations. And the people who are coming now are exactly the kind of people we're talking about. They're people coming to visit their family and friends, or who are going to the hospital because somebody's sick. So, and I'm going to wrap up.
Because we got 3 more
Yeah,
if they still
absolutely.
want to talk.
I appreciate your time, and I don't envy your job, but I'll help you any way I can.
Thank you, Brian.
Stan?
Dan, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate my Alderwoman for alerting me to this whole issue. I am Stan Mulvihill. I live in the Hillcrest subdivision, just on the western edge of Forest Park. We are similar to some other subdivisions like Parkview and others that have a split jurisdiction. My subdivision is 225 homes. I've been a trustee there for over 20 years, along with a couple of other people. 225 homes, the majority of which are in Clayton. Clayton outlaws what short-term rental, which we refer to as short-term lodging or commercial lodging. It's very similar to a B&B or a hotel of some kind that's a short-term rental. As in this case, defined as under 1 month, as you have. Generally speaking, our bias, it's a 100-year-old subdivision plus. There are numerous other private subdivisions throughout the city. You're well aware of those. And I just casually have had some conversations in the last month with a few of these trustees, and they're very concerned about where this is headed. Now, having listened and read the board bill, I applaud you for trying to get a handle on this. It obviously needs some regulation so that the good can prosper and the bad can be weeded out, and that the neighborhoods are protected. But there are some places in this city which do not want and do not need and have indentures that prohibit the renting on a short-term basis these properties. And as I've said to others, my concern is not setting up a guaranteed collision between our private indentures, which the city has no obligation to enforce, that's our job, versus having, or encouraging more short-term rentals, which we do not want. And regardless of whether they work very well, in some cases, I think they do. I think there are some neighborhoods, these are terrific ways to help keep the properties up. I've stayed in them in other cities. But I also know that there are some locations where they are not wanted. The overwhelming sentiment is not to have a transient situation where the expectation going in was a single-family dwelling zoning that has a family in there, not necessarily the way it used to be defined 100 years ago. That's changed also, and we're hip to that. We understand that, and we abide by that. And it's not discriminatory in any way in terms of orientations or race or any other things that you can think of. But this is a different land use.
I apologize. Call me with that address, please, and I will help. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Very quickly, this is a different land use that we did not count on and we do not want. And I don't want the burden, and I've said this to Heather, I don't want the burden put on trustees to have to catch a conditional use permit and maybe not catch it in time or not speak up at the right time, and suddenly we've got that use in our neighborhood. I think there's something to be said for the plat approach, because it does require the burden is on the applicant to go around and get those signatures, to get that buy-in. And I think there needs to be some accommodation to these private subdivisions or anywhere where the predominant feeling is a single-family homeowner, that our obligation is to support home ownership. We obviously go along with rental. There are people that do rent. There's not many, but there are some houses which are rented on an annual basis. But when you're near a major university like Washington University, I'm telling you, the temptation is there to start running B&Bs or Airbnb or whatever other system you want to call. So I'm just here to say very clearly, and I understand the problem, there are a number of us, I'm not saying it's universally accepted, but there are a number of us who are very strongly against any short-term rental. It's not to, we're not biased against that industry. We obviously there's some great places, but in certain locations that is not what our neighborhood has been about. And we're prepared to work with you, or however you want to go forward, you know, however much or little. I recognize that these laws have to be fair. You've got a number of due process issues here, which I won't take up your time today to go into.
No, believe me.
But I just want to reiterate that there is strong sentiment about this, and since you're wading into trying to regulate it, it's going to stir up a lot of conversation all of a sudden again. That's not to say you shouldn't go forward with all deliberate speed, and I hope you will.
Oh, no, we will. That much.
And I'm
I
happy to
know.
answer any questions, but there are a lot of people here, and I don't want to, you know, take up your time.
And no, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stan. I was just going to say, I know we've talked about this, how the city's role in enforcing kind of the private provisions. I'm hoping that there's something we could do, at least if somebody applies and there's some sort of red flag that it lets them know, look, you're applying to do this on a private street, and there may be other restrictions, and it's upon you to, you know, to do something. So like you said, we avoid the situation where somebody gets into the system and now they've been approved, and then after the fact they find out that they're going to get sued
It
by
happens
the
all the
homeowners
time. It
association.
happens
Right.
with
Yeah, we need to-
homeowner renovations where they need to submit to
Yeah.
trustees for approval. We have that issue with Clayton. Clayton is kind enough to, as a courtesy, to alert us proactively, but they have no requirement to do so, and of course they don't defend our indenture. I think this is a big issue. I think you've got some pretty pricey areas of the city that are in these circumstances, and my taxes, FYI, went up 33% the other year, all right?
Mine went up a bunch.
Yeah.
And I sit on the preservation board,
Yeah.
although I'm going to let Jack Coatar do it for me because they use words like fenestration and stuff that I have to keep going on my phone. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, let's just talk in general about how we can coordinate a little bit better. I mean, not only just on this, but on other
I think
issues
that
too.
it's just to put this down. I know there's some laws that, you know, due process issues that you have to be careful about. But, you know, I want the burden to be on, look, if they're good operators, terrific. I think that's fine. But the burden should be on the operator asking for a change in this type. It shouldn't be on the trustees to go track it down sometimes after the fact, too late. We have that happen now with just the renovations, and I think this has the potential to do the same thing. And I think there are a lot of people who would be very upset if it did. I just want to, you know, reiterate, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, sir.
And we will eventually pass some legislation. I think this is a good start to a bill, but I do think, at least the residents have called me, said if we pass this, before we pass plat and petition or anything that's over in HUD's, we've in a sense said, as a city, give us $100 and you can put them wherever you want. I mean, whether they understand the bill or not, that's
Right, I
the
understand.
perception of the bill.
Yeah. Well, that's it, you know, and so education, I think somebody mentioned that, but that's not enough. You got to have some teeth in these things.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, you just do.
No,
I was a
absolutely.
multifamily housing developer for 25 years, so you got to have some teeth.
No, I agree, and like I said, I sit on that preservation board, and people put windows in to find out that you got to take them back out because they were not, you know, and it wasn't a good fit for me, that's why I
Thank you
quit.
again, sir.
Thank you.
Lena?
How are you doing?
I'm all right. Thank you for asking. I'd like to personally apologize
no, you're
for
fine.
making a quip about this or laughing about it. I am also very passionately and personally invested in this. My husband and I used to live in Gravois Park. We now have the place that we live as a rental property to long-term tenants. We were quite literally driven out of that neighborhood due to the crime that took place because of long-term landlords, and specifically people like Nathan Cooper, who have systematically exploited the system by taking the HUD homes and the Section 8 homes and renting it out to undesirable tenants. I digress. We've moved now to Benton Park. We own a four-family building, and we have originally intended, we built it and remodeled it from the ground up, bought it for basically 5 figures, less than $20,000, and now it's coming up to be on Zillow almost $200,000 based on our improvements that we've made on this. We originally intended, before we ever heard of Airbnb, to use it as a long-term rental unit. Statistically, out of those 3 units, we had about 1/3 of our tenants being undesirable residents. We had to remove them through lawful means as we could, and as you are aware, through due process, they can take from 60 to 90 days, and if at best we could get 3 days from a fast track, because we should provide some sort of proof saying that they are, creating a criminal risk to us. Under Airbnb terms of service, we have every right to be able to remove that problem guest that moment that we have been made aware of this problem. And this is typically what people ideally would like to do as long-term or as short-term rental owners. As Brian did mention, education is key, because anecdotally, I am a problem property. At least I was last year for the year, because I called on 2 different occasions, and the first occasion being that they connected my property because the caller asked me where I lived.
Right.
And it was because there was gunshots taking place on the corner of my neighborhood, right there in front of me. I called frantically. I've been told by my NSO that we need to stack calls in order to receive some sort of priority over this. So that stacking added to the list to put me down as a problem property. The second time I called was because I was misled by local residents who decided to use my home and exploit my good graces as an ambassador and short-term rental owner to use my home as a party house. It's through Airbnb. I rented out between 2 and 4 people to be able to be in there. There were supposed to be 2. He had 20. Loud music, all sorts of drugs happening. I called the police. At that point, I called, and I was frantic because I was afraid of the damage that would be happening by these folks. I called, I think, 3 and 4 times the first time. The police were not aware that through Airbnb terms of service that they could lawfully remove everyone, including the 2 that were supposed to be on that contract for that evening or those 2 nights that they had rented. So I had to call a second time to bring the police back and request that they remove them from the premises. So that then put us on the nuisance list, which is the loophole that really causes a trouble for us, because I understand at least one time or another you said when short-term rental owners become on the nuisance property list, we're not allowed to run our business anymore.
Well, technically, if you're on that nuisance property list, we can actually have a hearing, and I've done it, not on, oddly enough, short-term rental, but on some, we can condemn your house where you can't be in there for up to 1 year. You can't occupy it. You have to maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's not a good place to be.
No.
But it is a good tool, and I've used it on people that rent a house, even own a house.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, let's go back to Gravois Park where I lived. It was an 8-year battle against trying to get the police to respond when I called 3 and 4 times because someone was shot by a drive-by in front of my home. It took over 45 minutes for the police to even arrive. This was one of multitudes of times that I called for occupancy inspections, exterior, interior, due to, again, people like Happy Family, Mr. Lee, Nathan Cooper. these folks who have systematically exploited the system and caused problems for the neighbors around us. And I personally invite you to drive yourself down to the 3700 block of Minnesota where our home is and tell me whether any of those folks might be any of these short-term rental landlords that you believe to be the ones that cause the problems in our neighborhood. Because I will guarantee that not one of them are. It's Nathan Cooper. It's Mr. Lee. It's those problem properties. I know that ideally long-term renters or long-term landlords should be responsible, personally responsible for their homes, and they are for the most part. Statistically, if you would like to, if you could, and I will go myself down to the Recorder of Deeds, and they told me that I could go look for all the properties that Nathan Cooper owns, and then I'm going to try to cross-reference that with all of the properties that were involved with any sort of major criminal activity and or murders that have been taking place. And I challenge you to see whether that statistically correlates with the problem properties that you allege that short-term rental landlords are for this.
You can go to the letter GEO, GEO St. Louis, and then it just goes to a website, agree. You can type in any property in the city of St. Louis. It'll tell you how many calls, how many complaints, if they pay their taxes, who owns it, where they live.
Okay.
So Geo St. Louis is a good resource
Okay.
to look for stuff like that.
So let me go back then to Airbnb. One of the reasons why we really saw a good possibility for this Airbnb was that through their terms of service, they have many vetting issues put in place that help keep us monitored and regulated ourselves. One of those being when we had to submit an occupancy inspection. The occupancy inspectors told us we went far beyond what was required for the city of St. Louis. We were only complying with the Airbnb terms of service were. So at this point, those regulations are, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of redundant. We already do far surpass what regulations are required for any sort of owner-occupant landlord. Again, I reiterate, it could take 3 to 6 months to get a bad tenant out. With Airbnb, it could take minutes to hours, and we have no problem. Ideally, again, as someone had mentioned too, if we fall below 4.7 in our reviews, which are largely, or they're directly related to the guests that we have who put those reviews in, we will be delisted and no longer able to use this as a rental platform. And that is solely contingent about the quality of our apartment, the quality of the neighborhood that surrounds us, and the neighbors that help us or that take care of us, and the community in which we serve. I myself, the property that I have is a block away from Yaki's Pizza. I have a personal invitation to everybody whenever they check into our place to take advantage of all of the businesses that we have on Cherokee neighborhood. And I'll also guarantee you that we bring in more revenue from our guests using the restaurants, the gift shops, the tourist areas around there, up to the Arch, to Lohmeyer, to everywhere around St. Louis that they come and spend their money in. And I'll be willing to bet you that these long-term tenants, while I know they're contributing to our community, they're not going out to dinner. They're not going out to breakfast. They're not going out to lunch. They're not going and buying, souvenirs and all this stuff. So there is a lot more money, I think, that is contributed by these tourists that we help to bring in. And I was actually late for this meeting because my neighbor stopped me to let me know that he and the other neighbors were complimenting on the new tuck pointing job that we just had finished on our front home. And my husband and I just planted, or he personally, because I was working my second job to help supplement this, he planted vinca and all sorts of bulbs and all this stuff to help improve our quality of our yard. I also personally monitor my alley on this T on the 3300 block of Iowa with garbage, and have been complimented by my own alderman as he was driving by, saying, "This is the cleanest street in the neighborhood," because I go there at least monthly, along with another neighbor to help me, who also is an Airbnb landlord, who helps to clean the trash in this alleyway. And I challenge you to find any of these long-term landlords like Nathan Cooper and Mr. Lee and Happy Family and Gateway Properties to whether they go down and personally clean up their properties. I think it's quite the opposite at this point. He's been well documented in several articles in the newspaper saying that it's only the problem of the police because they need to take care of those bad people, even though he's the one that rents to them that causes this. Anecdotally again, my other neighbor on Minnesota had basically lost his own property because he had long-term renters that exploited his situation. And we both spent, or at least more I did, I spent several months calling the police on them because the mother was yelling at the children by the end of the month saying, "You best get them drugs or we're going to, or I'm going to call the police." She said, "Get that money or I'm going to call the police on you trying to sell drugs," which ironically, what would happen was her 8 to 12 people that were staying in that property illegally, who were under the age of 18, all the way down to probably 8 or 9, would jog towards the middle of the street on anybody who decided to slow down and hang in their window and ask them what they want. And it's the people who would respond what they wanted, they'd yell at their mom, and mom would throw down packets of drugs down from her second-story window to give to her children to pay their rent. And this took months to remove them from the property. This doesn't happen with Airbnbs. I understand that not everyone likes to adhere. I do agree that someone who would rent from a landlord and then sublease as an Airbnb property, that doesn't work out. That shouldn't be. Everybody should have personal responsibility for that. Ultimately, however, Airbnb has their own vetting system, and I'd like you also I'd like to personally invite you all to become members of Airbnb so you understand the process on how it can be viably monitored. Each property, if you find, let's say, one of your neighbors has an Airbnb that's causing these issues, much like the woman who alleges that has rapists in her house. Airbnb vets their guests, and they take a criminal background report and will not allow someone who has a criminal background, such as rape or any sort of violent criminal activity, to even be a member on Airbnb. So that, first off, doesn't happen. We can't necessarily guarantee that with the long-term rental landlords, like I said, with the people like Nathan Cooper. Though there's that vetting process. Oh, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Brian, what were you saying about the?
Oh, one of the points.
Yeah. Sorry.
Points that you were making, I was going to talk to you afterward, but Airbnb has as part of their
You have to come.
Airbnb and some of the other platforms as part of their terms of service will ask about restrictions in the area, and if you are in an area where it's not allowed, you are not supposed to have an Airbnb or whatever. Yeah. So, but you make a very good point, and that is part of that education of the communities, and education of city officials, and education of property owners about all these different things, because some of this stuff happens, people just don't realize.
Yeah, well, I also agree with what he was saying, too. If the police were more informed that they know that if there is a call to service for them, they can get them all out right then and there, as long as they know it's an Airbnb. If they violate any terms of service, that we would like some request or for action, we get them out that night. Second off, as far as the vetting process is concerned, oh, boy, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to somewhat have to, because I think there's another, I think we only got the room till 1. and I thought this would go to 12, and I see more people coming in, and they might be here for the next
Oh,
meeting.
if you have a problem, sorry, very quickly,
Oh, no,
if you have a problem with the property, you can go onto the listing, go down below, and there's a big red button that says report the listing, and you as a concerned neighbor can say, hey, these people are throwing parties, well, and doing all this stuff. Also, as far as parking being a situation, my 4 family, if we are fully occupied, including my husband's vehicles and mine, have 5 vehicles that can have the ability to park on the street. My neighbor, who is a long-term rental, who has a 4 family, between them have 18 vehicles, at which we have been trying to fight again for street department or the parking enforcement to enforce the fact that they have 3 to 5 commercial vehicles stored on the public street. So here we are dealing with kind of the other end of the spectrum, where we just would like to have our own, we'd like to have the 2 spots that we thought we could have some sort of fair game on in front of our own spot. But regardless of whether we're short-term or long-term, we're trying to fight with our other neighbors. 4 rooms, 18 cars.
Well, there's-
I know.
And I agree, and there's good, and I, I know Brian, and he's my neighbor, and he does do, I've never gotten a complaint on any of his, so I think what this legislation's trying to do is figure a way that the good people can still operate and the bad people can't, but it still runs into a lot of issues. But Heather, did you have?
I was just going to make one comment. Thank you for your testimony. That even though Airbnb may have a good vetting process and they are voluntarily paying taxes, the point of us doing citywide legislation is that anybody can do a short-term rental, whether they're on Airbnb or VRBO, or if they're not on any platform whatsoever. And so that's part of why we have to have legislation, because even if Airbnb is doing it, that doesn't cover everyone who's doing a short-term rental. And same with the taxes. I mean, right now, Airbnb could show up tomorrow and say, we're not going to do this anymore. And so there's no teeth to require that. There's no teeth to require any of the other platforms to do it. And so that's part of the impetus for having regulation, is to fill in all of those gaps. So I just want to, I appreciate that Airbnb has this system, but you can do a short-term rental in the city of St. Louis and not vet anybody right now, or have, and none of those things are in place unless you go through Airbnb. So I just want to make sure that everybody realizes that that's part of what this is about, is leveling the playing field, so that no matter where you live in the city, it's the same expectation.
At this point, we are paying several types of taxes, including through Explore St. Louis, which, as far as I'm concerned, are not representing us, even though we are being taxed into it. We pay into that tourism tax through Airbnb terms of service, and we're not being represented by
Well, part of the
Explore
reason
St.
that lodging tax is there is because if you're going to have a whole bunch of people who are coming into the city, they're going to be using the roads, they're going to be using the facilities, we need the police to be able to respond, and so that's what those taxes go to. And so I think we all are being served by that, and it's not up to Explore St. Explore St. Louis is not the entity that is necessarily representing short-term rental owners. It's just that tax is being collected so that we can then cover those expenses that the rest of us who live here, we have to incur those costs. So that's the point of it. And so if short-term rentals are bringing people into the city, which I think is a good thing, we also need to realize that, yeah, we're going to need to call the police if there's issues. They're going to be, again, they're going to be using the roads, they're going to be using our amenities, they're going to need lighting, all of these services are available to them, and they should be paying into it. So that's kind of what that lodging tax is about. Thank you.
So I think your husband is the last speaker, if you still want to speak? Yes. Come on up. I think you're it.
Well, hi, my name's Jamie Jessup. As my wife described what we do already, so I won't do that again. I tend to be a little coarse when I speak. Sometimes when I think something's unfair, I think that there's something behind it. I apologize for that ahead of time, but what I really want is for peace, prosperity, and happiness for everyone. That's what I really want. But some things I don't understand are, like my wife was describing about when we lived on Minnesota. And I'm assuming that I hear that this legislation's for the safety of the people in the neighborhood, for the most part. So in a lane of keeping the city safe from these outside people. We had to move from our house in Minnesota. We had hundreds of calls on properties that never became nuisance properties. They were never labeled as nuisance properties. We pick on Nathan Cooper because he owned 4 properties on our block. The other property, one of the other properties was ours, and the rest of them were owned by out-of-state investments. Not a single owner lived in the city at all. We called hundreds of times. I had people shot in the front yard multiple times. At least once a year, somebody got shot and killed in the front yard. That's a serious problem. If we want to talk about safety of all this stuff, we've got newspaper articles, major news outlets writing about one specific person describing that he's not got locks on doors. He's charging twice the normal rent rate through Section 8 government checks, driving up the rent rates. He shouldn't be doing that. He should, I watched people move in and in and in and out of every building. There were no electrical inspections. Every time an electrical inspection changes names in the city, it gets tagged. And you know that you have to have an inspection for that. There's things in process to cover basically everything that's going on. I wouldn't want parties next to my place all the time either. I wouldn't want just any weird person showing up, but I mean, we have to drive out in society. You can't sit there at your house and say, well, I've got to know everything that these people are doing. That's not your business. You don't know. Everybody needs to know that. Anybody should be able to exist and not sit there and be like, I wonder if he's a rapist or he's a murderer. Oh my God, there's no way to live your life. But I had to move out of my home. I paid for it completely. You know, it was cheap. It was $10,000 to get it because Nathan Cooper came up here to file every year to get the taxes or the value of his property to decrease so that he could pay less property taxes on his hundreds and hundreds of buildings. And I'm pretty sure that's a commercial venture, right? Right?
We're not going to give any.
If you have 100 property, yeah. Well, I mean, this is why I'm here. So what we want to do, and we have a neighborhood stabilization officer working with the FBI to collect data, because we can't do it, of where the murders have happened. And we want to cross-reference it with Nathan's properties and see, well, if all of a sudden somebody peed on a lawn out here, and here we are making legislation for the safety of the city, people are getting shot and killed daily on the lawns. You can't lock your doors. You got articles written describing this. And every time what about Nathan Cooper? If you guys are worried about safety, what is that? What is that about? I'm not understanding what you're after here. It doesn't make sense. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have some legislation. I'm not saying that we should be allowed to do whatever we want. But like I was thinking earlier when I told her, if you're not breaking any laws, if you're not being mean or harming or taking anybody's property or them, if you're not breaking any laws at all, you can do whatever you want, right?
Well, there's no.
I mean, within reason, you can do that. There's nothing. It maybe with the lady who was. I mean, I wasn't trying to snicker at her. I was snickering at the situation where I had to move and leave my home. I had to abandon my home. Police could never do anything. Never once could get moved out of Nathan Cooper's properties. We are, and there's a lot of people who aren't here. A lot of people citywide who are aware of the problem. Why are you focusing on this problem so much if you're worried about the safety when you've got people literally dying daily at these properties, dying, getting murdered, getting bullets put in their heads, in their bodies?
So there's gun legislation we're working on. This is part of a lot of different legislations, one of which I disagreed with, but was the decline cats. I mean, we have constituents to call on multiple different issues. In my neighborhood, you know, a lot of them, people are really not wanting to have Airbnb or any kind of rental, you know, daily rental in the area.
Well,
so we have to listen to what each alderman, like your alderman, is going to listen to what you have to say. And then that's how legislation, do you remember, and I'm going to keep it pretty sharp because I really got to go, but if you remember back Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a bill. You know, so what happens is somebody makes a complaint, then the alderman makes a bill, then the bill goes, you know, into a committee like it's this, and after it goes through several steps, it becomes a law. Whether it's a stop sign on the street or whatever, it's constituent-driven complaints.
I understand that.
So we get a lot.
So that's why we're here.
Right, and so we get a lot of constituent
We
complaints.
couldn't even get a police presence on the street for people were getting, 2 people got murdered in a week in the alley out front.
And
You know,
I'm with
Will we
you.
get a camera around the corner at the school?
We've tried to do gun legislation. Every time we step into something, Jeff
We don't
City
need to
says no.
develop any new laws for this. I mean, shooting people is illegal.
Yeah, but it's
We'll
not
deal with
illegal for me to walk down the street, even at 12 years old, with an AK-47.
No, I mean, that's a
And-
fantasy.
and-
I haven't seen any
and,
AKs with 12
You know,
years
with
old.
all the shootings, there needs to be some sort of gun legislation.
I
I'm
think-
sorry, because we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
let me
you
state a
go.
couple other things, because I know how the process of law gets made. We don't need to recover that here. I want to state some things on the record. You know, it's not a new way of travel. People have been doing this for a long time. All the same people traveling, and me and her, and I know any property owner, I wouldn't want parties in my place. I put a lot of time and work into it, and I couldn't imagine even any investor who buys a property would, they set it up quick. They paint the walls gray, put the little IKEA stuff in there, flip right out of it as cheap as they can go. They don't want that getting destroyed. Nobody wants their property destroyed. I understand that there could be some people who don't pay attention, and those people are coming in to party, taking advantage of Airbnb and the fact that they can go do that and run right out. But the property owner, not the people who are there doing it, needs to be held responsible for, I understand that. If I have a bunch of, and I'm disturbing my neighbors, I'll be held responsible. So I keep it nice for them.
And I'm sure you're a
If you
good
have in the
Airbnb.
city, long-term rentals, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, or tell me the real way, if you have 6 or more units on a building, it's considered commercial, right? Or,
I don't know that answer.
That's under state statute. I think it's 5 or more, I think it's more than 5.
She's an attorney, I'm not.
Well,
I mean-
I'm not rendering any legal opinions.
She's not running it, and I'm a car wash guy.
I'm just thinking,
There's commercial for assessment purposes and there's commercial for zoning purposes, so,
right, I understand the difference between those two, too. It seems like some people don't, but to me, I'm paying the same exact percentage of the convention and tourism tax as Explore St. Louis. And we have our 3 properties well, it's 1 property, actually, with a 4-family. We live in the third, and the other 3 are the short-term rentals. I'm paying the same percentage as Holiday Inn, and they are, you know what Holiday Inn is. I'm sitting there on Sunday on my hands and knees scrubbing, my floor. Somebody spilled some tea or something. I'm wondering, is that CEO out there probably on his hands and knees scrubbing the floors? People say we're not regulated also, and I'd like to read over here the occupancy tax collected and remittance by Airbnb in Missouri, so everybody can understand what we currently pay. This isn't some idea that's in the future. This isn't something that's going to be proposed. This is what we do now. Missouri state sales tax, 4.225% of the listing price, including any cleaning fees for reservations 20 nights or shorter. We pay a city sales tax, or you would be paid, I think ours is under St. Louis City, of 0.25%, 1.375% of the listing price, including any fees for reservations 29 nights or shorter. County sales tax, if you're in a county, of 0.25 to 5% of 29 nights or shorter. In addition to county sales tax, 1.25 to 0.5% of the listing price, including any cleaning fees for 29 nights or shorter. We also pay a tourism tax to maintain the quality of water of 0.25% of the listing price, including any cleaning fees for reservations 29 nights or shorter. We pay a promotional tourism tax of 0.5 to 5% of the listing price, including any cleaning fees for 29 nights or shorter. We also pay a local sales tax, 1% of the listing price, including any cleaning fees for reservations 29 nights or shorter. In St. Louis City, we pay a hotel and motel room sales tax of 3.5% of the listing price, including any cleaning fees for reservations 31 nights or shorter. And we also pay a convention and tourism tax of 3.75% of the listing price, including any cleaning fees for reservations 31 nights or shorter. And all those taxes, all combined, plus the commercial sales tax adjustment, I'm not understanding if this is, with all that we do, and many people have come from all over the world to experience Cherokee Street, and they go by. We didn't even know that was there. We came into town to see a Blues game, and if they go to the hotels, they're stuck on the corridor. They're not going to come down to the south side and Cherokee Street, you know? Not all of us, and I think a lot of us can agree that St. Louis needs all the help it can get. I think that's probably why we're all here. And this is a new day. I mean, people book rooms on their phone, on the internet. You don't show up and just do it. I want it to be better. I don't want people out there destroying us, but I can't understand if we're doing this legislation for the safety of the citizens of the city, why I asked my alderman, you know, what are you doing about Nathan? I still can't move home. Yeah, we know. People get murdered daily at his properties, and nothing. Nobody's here talking about it. But somebody peed on a lawn, and we're introducing the trail to get to making legislation. And a lot of people are wondering why. They can't make it here because the meeting was supposed to be here, and it was moved, and then it ended up happening again, too. So that's what I've got. Thanks.
And again, it will be up to the sponsor more so, but if they want to hold a night meeting, we will. And I definitely get the conflict between the Airbnb. I had apartments. I'm glad I got out of it. I was not the best landlord. I'd rent to one person. When I came back, there was other people living there. I got out because I knew no matter how well I screened, that was horrible.
That's what I was getting to. I'm sorry, about the people in different parts of the city. We all live and you may live in a place where you don't want that, or a neighborhood association could they could self-police. It's not like a kid. What if her neighbor showed up and bought the house, and he had 3 cars, and their kids wanted to sleep in tents and camp out in the backyard in their sleeping bags? I mean,
right. No, I understand, and I understand the passion on both sides. So
yeah,
all I'm trying to do is put
we
something.
kind of need it too to help bring people to the city and show them a positive thing, because all they read in the news is.
I don't think you're getting any disagreement from us. Anyway, I think if that was everybody, and I appreciate, I know these guys waited a long time, and there's very much a potential for a night meeting. Did you have any other questions?
I don't think so. Thank you.
By the way, I've been building for the last decade. I've had my business license in the city of St. Louis. I know basically every aspect of the construction trade, plumbing, electrical, framing, drywall, finishing, everything.
Right.
And I work with operating Airbnbs, so I would be interested in being on the task force or being an inspector. And I also wanted to note that there aren't any new properties. All these properties every property is already required to be inspected. There are no new properties, so there shouldn't be a need for extra work.
I think if you want to be a city inspector, there's openings. They're looking for people.
Well,
And you should please apply, because we need people with knowledge to be inspectors. We need, you know, I mean, it wouldn't be for this particular thing, but it'd be overall building inspectors, electrical inspectors.
Well, you don't want me
We're-
inspecting Nathan Cooper's property.
Well, it doesn't matter, because you have to still do what's right.
Yeah, I mean, well, what's right would be to.
I'm going to adjourn this, and then if you want to talk, I'll come out. Thank you.
Thank you. So okay.
That's really up to you guys.
I'll talk to Christine.
I think. I wish to have a legislation or somewhere.
Thank you, Sharita.
No problem.